In the vast, merciless ocean of time, there are islands that were once mighty continents, civilizations whose names once thundered around the world, and their influence stretched for thousands of kilometers. They built cities that seemed beyond the reach of the ages, built temples that reached to the heavens, and created masterpieces of art that could awe even the gods. These peoples understood the mysteries of space, developed complex social structures, and built societies that were astounding in their organization and ingenuity. Their names, such as the Aztecs, with their golden cities hidden in mountain valleys, and the Sumerians, whose cuneiform script became the voice of humanity, echoed like thunder, and their deeds were carved in stone, recorded on papyrus, and passed down by word of mouth through countless generations. They seemed eternal, unshakable pillars of history, destined to shine through the ages. But one day the thunder stopped. The echo of power died away. The stones that had once been part of the grand buildings had turned to dust, blown away by the winds of oblivion. Where are the Mayans with their grandiose pyramids and prophecies encoded in intricate glyphs? Where is the Harappan civilization, whose cities were planned with unprecedented precision at that time, with perfect sewerage and a unique script that has not yet been deciphered? Where did the Minoans disappear, whose palaces on the island of Crete hid labyrinths and myths about bullmen, and whose sea dominion stretched across the Aegean Sea? The world remembers their names, these sonorous fragments of the past, but their stories are full of gaping gaps, silent testimonies of great things disappearing. We are standing in front of ruins that do not speak, but only whisper riddles about how power turned to dust, and the truth was hidden behind the veil of time. This whisper is the voice of oblivion, which calls us to travel through lost worlds, where once life was bubbling, where thought was boiling, and where now only silence reigns. What caused these mighty civilizations to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only shadows, riddles, and questions that still have no clear answers? They were the greatest silent witnesses to the unfathomable nature of time and destiny, an eternal reminder of the fragility of human achievement. Sumerians, the cradle of civilization, deserted forever. In the fertile valley between the majestic rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, in what is now Iraq, about 6,000 years ago, in the shimmering haze of the interfluve, a civilization was born that many historians rightly call the cradle of all mankind, Sumer. They were not a single people in the modern sense, but rather a group of thriving city-states, each with its own unique dynasty, culture, and patron saint. But they were united by common beliefs, a common language, and, most strikingly, incredibly bold and advanced achievements for their time. The Sumers were true pioneers in many areas, laying the fundamental foundations of what we are now proud to call civilization. Their greatest and perhaps most revolutionary contribution was undoubtedly the invention of writing, the so-called cuneiform script. This breakthrough changed the course of history forever. On wet clay tablets, using sharpened reed sticks, they scratched out symbols like wedges that could convey complex thoughts and ideas. Thanks to this invention, the Sumerians were not only able to keep accurate records of trade, crops, and taxes, which were vital to their advanced economy, but also, more importantly, they were able to preserve knowledge for future generations, passing on wisdom and experience through the ages. This was a breakthrough that brought humanity out of thousands of years of prehistoric silence and marked the beginning of recorded history. On these tablets, we find not only stingy administrative records, but also majestic epic poems celebrating heroes and gods, detailed astronomical observations that allowed them to create one of the first accurate calendars, and even early versions of legal codes. Sumer's cities such as the legendary Ur, Lagash, Uruk, and Nippur were not just settlements, but authentic megacities of their time, pulsating centers of commerce, fine crafts, and deep spiritual life. In the center of them rose majestic ziggurats, massive step temples that soared into the sky, symbolizing the unbreakable connection between the earth and the divine world. These structures were not just places of worship, but also administrative centers, storehouses of treasures and grain. The Sumerians created a complex irrigation system of canals and dams that allowed them to efficiently use the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, turning arid lands into fertile fields that could feed thousands of people. It is to them that we owe such fundamental inventions as the wheel, without which it is impossible to imagine modern transport, the sail, which opened the era of sea travel, and the plow, which radically changed agriculture. Their base 60 counting system, strikingly different from our decimal system, is still used to measure time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and angles, 360 degrees in a circle. Their legal system, embodied in the laws of King Ur-Nammu, long before the famous Code of Hammurabi, established order and justice in society, and Sumerian myths and epics, in particular, the immortal Epic of Gilgamesh, became the basis for many later Middle Eastern and even ancient tales, reflecting the deepest understanding of human nature, the struggle with death, the search for the meaning of life and immortality. However, despite all their unthinkable achievements, despite the fact that they, in fact, gave the world civilization in its modern sense, the Sumerian civilization disappeared. And this is the main and most disturbing mystery. There was no sudden catastrophic cataclysm that destroyed their cities in one terrible moment, like the destruction of Pompeii or Atlantis. Their decline was slow, painful, and almost imperceptible, spanning centuries. After a period of great prosperity, which occurred around the 3rd millennium BC, Sumer began to gradually fade. Their majestic cities gradually fell into disrepair. Their irrigation systems collapsed or clogged. Their populations dwindled, and their unique, complex language, Sumerian, gradually gave way to Akkadian, the language of Babylon and Assyria, their more aggressive and dynamic neighbors. By the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, Sumer as an independent civilization, with its unique political and cultural identity, virtually ceased to exist, leaving only ruins buried under the sand and priceless clay tablets that have been waiting for centuries to be deciphered and tell the story of forgotten greatness. The main mystery of their disappearance lies not in their destruction, but in their gradual, almost inexplicable dissolution. Why couldn't the people who gave the world the written language, the wheel and the basics of jurisprudence save themselves? Why did their unique culture, so rich and innovative, fail to stand the test of time and be assimilated or absorbed by the more aggressive and militant neighboring empires? Was it climate change, salinization of the soil, constant internecine warfare between city-states? Or was it a deeper, elusive process of cultural and social degradation that wiped out the greatness of the cradle of civilization? This question still hangs in the air, like a hot wind over the desolate ruins of ancient Sumerian cities. Harappan civilization, secrets of the Indus Valley. In the vast expanse of the Indus River Valley, which now encompasses Pakistan, northwestern India, and parts of Afghanistan, one of the most mysterious and least understood great civilizations of antiquity flourished between 2500 and 1900 BC, the Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley Civilization. It was a contemporary of Sumer and ancient Egypt, but radically different from them in many ways. What we know about it is mostly based on archaeological findings, as its written language has not yet been deciphered, which shrouds its history in an impenetrable veil of mystery. This silence is one of the most intriguing aspects of her existence. The heyday of Harappan civilization was marked by the construction of surprisingly developed and planned cities such as Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Dholavira. These cities impress with their well-thought-out urban planning, which demonstrates incredible engineering and urban planning skills for that time. The streets were straight and laid out in a strict grid. The houses were built of standard-sized baked bricks, and each house had access to a water supply, and most surprisingly, to a complex sewer and drainage system that was far ahead of its time and surpassed similar systems even in some European cities of the 19th century. In Mohenjo-Daro, a large pool was discovered, a huge, perfectly executed structure that was supposedly used for ritual ablutions, demonstrating a high level of public hygiene and possibly religious practice. The cities had extensive public granaries, which indicated centralized management and organized agriculture. The Harappans were skilled artisans. They made fine jewelry made of gold and precious stones, magnificent ceramics, intricate seals with images of animals and possibly deities, as well as high-quality products made of copper and bronze. They had a well-developed trade network extending to Mesopotamia, as evidenced by the Harappan seals found in Ur. The lack of obvious palaces, monumental temples, or images of warrior rulers distinguishes it from other great civilizations, suggesting that society could have been more egalitarian, ruled perhaps by priests or a council of elders, rather than by monarchs. However, by about 1900 BC, the Harappan civilization began to decline, and then completely disappeared. Its once thriving cities were abandoned, its irrigation system fell into disrepair, and its inhabitants dispersed or degraded to simpler forms of existence. The main mystery lies precisely in this silent, almost sudden disappearance. There is no evidence of massive invasions, devastating wars, or natural disasters that could explain such a complete collapse. The cities were not burned or looted, they were simply abandoned. Until now, there is no single, generally accepted explanation for what exactly led to such a dramatic end to such a developed and seemingly stable civilization. This makes the Harappan civilization one of the most striking examples of a sudden and inexplicable disappearance in human history. A challenge for archaeologists and historians who are trying to understand what exactly broke the thread of its development. Minoans, lords of the sea, swallowed up by the waves of oblivion. On the sunlit island of Crete, in the heart of the Aegean Sea between 2700 and 1450 BC, another amazing and mysterious civilization flourished, the Minoan. It was the first highly developed society in Europe, named by British archaeologist Arthur Evans in honor of the legendary King Minos. Unlike the warlike Sumerians or the mysterious Harappans, the Minoans were masters of the sea, skilled mariners and merchants whose mastery of the sea lanes ensured their wealth and prosperity. Their culture was incredibly vibrant and most notably, relatively peaceful, judging by the lack of massive fortifications around their cities. The heyday of Minoan civilization is associated with the construction of magnificent palaces, which were not just the residences of rulers, but also administrative, economic, and religious centers. The most famous of them, the Palace of Knossos, the legendary labyrinth of the Minotaur, impresses with its size, complex architecture, multi-level buildings, frescoes depicting vivid scenes from life, nature, and religious rituals, as well as an advanced water supply and sewerage system for that time. The palaces were decorated with colorful frescoes depicting marine life, dolphins, and bull jumpers, a unique Minoan ritual that still causes controversy about its significance. The Minoans possessed two types of writing, hieroglyphic and linear A, both of which are still undeciphered, adding another layer of mystery to their history. They were outstanding craftsmen in the creation of exquisite ceramics, jewelry, and seals, demonstrating fine taste and high craftsmanship. Their ships sailed the Mid-Earth Sea, establishing trade links with Egypt, the Levant, Cyprus, and mainland Greece. Minoan society appears to have been highly organized, and women may have played a more significant role than in other ancient cultures. The cult of the mother goddess was central, and rituals associated with bulls occupied an important place in their religious life. However, around 1450 BC, the Minoan civilization suddenly and dramatically collapsed. Palaces were destroyed, cities abandoned, and the once thriving culture disappeared, replaced by Mycenaean culture from mainland Greece. The main mystery lies in the reason for this sudden collapse. The most popular and widely accepted hypothesis links the demise of the Minoan civilization to the catastrophic eruption of Mount Thera, present-day Santorini, located about 100 kilometers north of Crete. This eruption, one of the largest in the history of mankind, caused a tsunami of colossal force, which hit the coast of Crete, destroying ports, fleet, and coastal settlements. In addition, volcanic ash could cover fertile land, rendering it unsuitable for agriculture, leading to famine and social unrest. However, some researchers doubt that only an eruption could have led to the complete destruction of the entire civilization. Were there any internal conflicts or uprisings? Or did the weakened Minoans become easy prey for the invading Mycenaeans, which may have finished off an already weakened civilization? Archaeological evidence shows traces of the destruction of palaces, but it is not always clear what exactly was the cause: a natural disaster or human violence. The mystery of the Minoan demise, hidden beneath layers of volcanic ash and sea depths, remains one of the most intriguing questions in the archaeology of the Aegean Sea. Maya, a calendar of stars shrouded in jungle, deep in the heart of Central America, among the impenetrable jungles of present-day southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, from 2000 BC until the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century, one of the most vibrant and intellectually advanced civilizations of the New World flourished, the Mayan civilization. Unlike centralized empires, the Maya were a network of city-states that, despite frequent conflicts, shared a common culture, language, religion, and, most surprisingly, shared scientific and astronomical knowledge. Their legacy is not only the monumental pyramids, but also an astounding understanding of time, mathematics, and the cosmos. The Maya flourished during the classical period, from about 250 to 900 AD, when such majestic cities as Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Chichen Itza were built. These cities were not just settlements. They were grand ceremonial centers with towering pyramid temples, elaborate palace complexes, observatories, and sacred ball courts. The Maya were unrivaled masters of architecture and sculpture, creating incredible limestone structures decorated with intricate reliefs and hieroglyphic inscriptions. They developed a unique and complex writing system, hieroglyphic, which is still admired for its beauty and depth. On stelae, altars, and codices, they recorded their history, myths, genealogies of rulers, and of course, astronomical observations. Their greatest achievement, however, was undoubtedly the development of an extremely complex and precise calendar system. The Maya used not one but several interconnected calendars, including the sacred Tzolk'in, 260 days, and the civil Hab, 365 days, as well as a long count that kept track of huge periods of time. Their calendar calculations were so accurate that they could predict solar and lunar eclipses, and their mathematical system, using the concept of zero long before Europeans, allowed them to perform complex astronomical calculations. The Maya culture was deeply religious, and their pantheon included many gods associated with nature, the sun, rain, and fertility. Religious rituals, including sacrifices, played a central role in their lives. But around 900 AD, during a period known as the Classic Maya Collapse, most of the cities of the southern lowlands were suddenly abandoned. The majestic centers that had flourished for centuries fell silent, swallowed up by the advancing jungle. Construction of monumental structures stopped, the population plummeted, and the complex political structure collapsed. The main mystery lies in the reason for this dramatic and widespread decline. Why did a civilization that had reached such heights in astronomy and mathematics suddenly collapse? There is no single convincing explanation. Among the traditional hypotheses, these include excessive population growth and resource depletion. Overpopulation led to soil degradation, deforestation, and food scarcity. Droughts. Paleoclimatology data indicates several periods of severe and prolonged droughts that could undermine the agricultural base. Internecine wars, constant conflicts between city-states could deplete their forces and resources. And social unrest or uprisings, perhaps the oppression of the lower strata of the population, led to internal conflicts. However, none of these theories alone can fully explain the extent of the collapse. Some researchers are inclined to the idea of a combination of factors that created a perfect storm that undermined the stability of society. Were they really curses for breaking the balance with nature, as some local legends say? Or did their deep knowledge of the cycles of time foresee an inevitable end that they could not prevent? The mystery of the disappearance of the classic Maya still whispers in the winds among the overgrown ruins, reminding us of the fragility of even the greatest achievements. The Aztecs, the empire of the sun, extinguished by the conquerors. On the high plateau of central Mexico, surrounded by misty lakes and volcanic peaks, one of the last and perhaps most famous great civilizations of Mesoamerica flourished, the Aztec Empire. Emerging relatively late in the 14th century, the Aztecs, or Mexica as they called themselves, quickly rose from a humble nomad tribe to create a vast and powerful empire stretching from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, was a city of wonder, comparable in scale and beauty to the major European capitals of the time. Their greatness was so dazzling that its fall was one of the most dramatic and tragic episodes in world history. The rise of the Aztec Empire was marked by unprecedented military power and ingenious organization. The Aztecs created a complex system of government based on the triple alliance between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, which allowed them to dominate neighboring peoples by imposing tribute on them. This tribute, consisting of gold, precious stones, feathers, cotton, grain, and even human lives, flocked to the capital, ensuring its prosperity and splendor. Tenochtitlan was an engineering marvel, a city built on water, with a system of canals, aqueducts, floating gardens, chinamp, and wide avenues. At its center was the Templo Mayor, a great temple dedicated to the war god Huitzilopochtli and the rain god Tlaloc, where mass human sacrifices were performed to maintain cosmic order and appease the gods. The Aztecs were skilled farmers who developed innovative methods of growing food on chinampas, which allowed them to feed a huge population. They had a complex hieroglyphic script, a well-developed mythology, and their art, especially sculpture and penwork, was distinguished by expressiveness and symbolism. Aztec society was strictly hierarchical, with a powerful emperor at the top, a class of warriors and priests, and a well-developed trade and handicraft industry. Their military campaigns, though brutal, were not only for the purpose of conquest, but also for the purpose of capturing prisoners for sacrifice, which was an integral part of their religious system and worldview. However, unlike many other lost civilizations, the mystery of the disappearance of the Aztec Empire is not so vague, but it is no less tragic and instructive. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico with a small force, but with overwhelming technological superiority, firearms, steel, horses, and, last but not least, with allies from among the peoples enslaved by the Aztecs. Within 2 years, Tenochtitlan was destroyed, and the Aztec Empire was subjugated by a brutal siege and fierce fighting. The main mystery of their collapse lies not in what happened, but in the depth and speed of the collapse, as well as in the role played by factors not directly related to the war. The traditional hypothesis points to Spanish military superiority, weapons, tactics, horses, the support of Cortés by local peoples who hated the Aztecs for their brutality and tribute, especially the Tlaxcaltecs, and, perhaps most deadly of all, European, introduced diseases such as smallpox, to which the indigenous peoples were not immune. Smallpox plagues ravaged cities before Cortés's arrival and during the siege of Tenochtitlan, killing millions and robbing the Aztecs of their ability to resist. However, there are also deeper, almost mystical aspects. Some legends said that the arrival of white-bearded men from the east, such as the god Quetzalcoatl, was a portent of the end of the world or great changes. The behavior of Emperor Montezuma II, who initially accepted Cortés as a deity or messenger of the gods, was a fatal mistake that paralyzed the will to resist. Was this a self-fulfilling prophecy, or did the deep belief in the cycles of time inherent in Mesoamerican culture make them fatally accept their fate? The Aztecs, accustomed to ritual warfare, were not prepared for an all-out war of extermination. Their fall is a story about the collision of two worlds, where one, based on ancient beliefs and rituals, could not resist the other, armed not only with iron and gunpowder, but also with a completely different, ruthless logic of conquest. The Aztecs did not just disappear, they were destroyed, their culture suppressed, and their greatness erased from the face of the earth, leaving only ruins and a bloody reminder of how fragile even the most powerful world is in the face of external invasion and unknown threats. The Incas, the empire of the sun that disappeared into the mountains. High in the snow-capped peaks of the Andes, stretching across what is now Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, parts of Chile, Argentina, and Colombia, the greatest empire of prey, Colombian America flourished between the 12th and 16th centuries. The Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, land of the four sides. It was an incredibly organized and centralized power, spread out over 4,000 kilometers along a mountain range, with a population of up to 12 million people. Unlike other civilizations, the Incas did not have a written language as we understand it, but their genius was reflected in their remarkable engineering and managerial achievements, which allowed many peoples to be united under a single government. The rise of the Inca Empire, beginning with the reign of Pachacatec in the mid-15th century, was phenomenal. They created an extensive road network of more than 40,000 kilometers, consisting of paved roads, suspension bridges over gorges, and tunnels that connected the most remote corners of the empire. Chasca messengers scurried along these roads, providing instant communication between the capital city of Cusco and the periphery. Cusco, the navel of the world for the Incas, was a city built of perfectly fitted stone blocks without the use of mortar, which demonstrates the incredible skill of their builders. Among their architectural masterpieces, the mysterious city of Machu Picchu stands out, hidden high in the mountains, whose purpose is still a matter of debate, but its engineering and aesthetic perfection is amazing. The Incas were masters of terraced farming, turning steep mountain slopes into fertile stepping stones to feed the vast population. They did not use the wheel for transportation and did not have a developed iron metallurgy, but their gold and silver products were works of art. Their unique system of accounting and recording information was quipu complex knotted cords. The color, type, and location of the nodes on which numerical data and possibly even narratives were encoded. Inca society was strictly hierarchical, headed by Sapa Inca, the only Inca, who was considered the son of the sun god Inti. The state took care of every citizen by providing food and shelter in exchange for labor, a system known as mita. However, like the Aztecs, the great Inca Empire disappeared as a result of the clash with the European conquerors. In 1532, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro invaded their lands with a detachment of only 168 people. Despite the Inca numerical superiority, the empire was engulfed in a civil war between Atahualpa and Huáscar, which weakened it from within. Pizarro skillfully exploited this split. The attack on Emperor Atahualpa in Cajamarca, his capture and subsequent execution in 1532, despite a huge ransom by Zolat, decapitated the empire. Within a few years, the Spanish conquered Cusco and established their rule. The main secret of their fall, which is as stunning as its rise, lies in the incredible speed and apparent ease with which such a powerful empire fell. Traditional explanations include Spanish military and technological superiority, weapons, steel, horses, internal strife and civil war that split the empire just before the arrival of the Spaniards, epidemics of European diseases such as smallpox and measles that spread faster than the conquistadors, killing millions of Indians, including Inca Huáscar himself, and the centralized structure of the empire, which after the capture of the Sapa Inca was left without its population, accustomed to a strict hierarchy, did not know how to act independently. However, there are also deeper questions. Why were such brilliant engineers and organizers so unprepared for this new form of warfare? Was their society based on the absolute power of the Inca, too rigid to adapt to the shocking changes? Some researchers speak of a culture shock when the Incas could not comprehend the Spaniards, their cruelty and thirst for gold within the framework of their worldview. Their own legends did not predict such an enemy. Perhaps like the Aztecs, the Incas saw in the Spaniards something supernatural that paralyzed their will to resist effectively. They were conquered, their gold plundered, their culture suppressed. Today, all that remains of Inca grandeur are grand ruins and unsolved quippus, whispering tales of a lost empire that seems so firmly embedded in mountain ranges. Indus Valley ancient kingdoms and forgotten gods. Returning to the origins of antiquity, one of the most mysterious and, alas, least understood civilizations, we once again turn our eyes to the lands where Pakistan, northwestern India, and part of Afghanistan are located today. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, flourished here between approximately 3,300 and 1300 BCE. It was one of the three earliest civilizations of the Old World, along with Sumer in ancient Egypt, but was radically different in many of its unique features, especially in the context of its disappearance. What we know about it is mostly based on archaeological findings, since its written language has not yet been deciphered, which shrouds its entire history in an impenetrable veil of mystery and conjecture. This silence is one of the most intriguing aspects of its existence, as if its inhabitants have taken their secrets to eternity. The heyday of Harappan civilization was marked by the construction of surprisingly developed and planned cities, which in their scale and complexity surpassed many European cities even in the late Middle Ages. The most famous of them are Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Dolavira. These megacities amaze the imagination with their well-thought-out urban planning, demonstrating incredible engineering and urban planning skills for that time. The streets were strictly straight, laid out on a perfectly adjusted grid, and the buildings built of standard-sized baked bricks testified to a high level of standardization and centralized control. Almost every house had access to a water supply, and most surprisingly and uniquely, to a sophisticated sewer and drainage system that effectively diverted wastewater and significantly surpassed similar systems even in some European cities of the 19th century. In Mohenjo-Daro, the Great Pool was discovered, a huge, perfectly executed structure lined with bricks and covered with bitumen for water resistance. It is assumed that it was used for ritual ablutions, indicating a high level of public hygiene and possibly developed religious practices. The cities also had extensive public grain storage facilities, suggesting centralized economic management and organized agriculture. The Harappans were skilled artisans. Their skills were shown in the manufacture of exquisite jewelry made of gold, silver, and precious stones, magnificent ceramics, high-quality products made of copper and bronze. Especially noteworthy are the seals, small square or rectangular stone products with images of animals, unicorns, elephants, tigers, and possibly deities, as well as inscriptions in unencrypted writing. These seals were probably used in trade, and their presence in Mesopotamia indicates a developed trade network that stretched for thousands of kilometers. An interesting feature of this civilization is the apparent absence of obvious palaces, monumental temples, or images of warrior rulers, which sharply distinguishes it from Sumer and Egypt. This suggests that the society may have been more egalitarian, perhaps governed by a council of priests or elders rather than by all-powerful monarchs. It was a civilization focused on order, commerce, and, most importantly, a peaceful existence. However, by about 1900 BC, the majestic Harappan civilization began to decline, and then completely disappeared, as if disappearing into the hot air of the Indus Valley. Its once thriving cities were gradually abandoned, the irrigation system fell into disrepair, the population dwindled or dispersed, and the level of urban culture sharply degraded to simpler forms of existence. The main and most painful mystery lies precisely in the silent, almost sudden, inexplicable disappearance. There is no convincing evidence of massive invasions, devastating wars, or large-scale natural disasters that could explain such a complete and dramatic collapse. The cities were not burned or looted as a result of military operations. They were simply gradually abandoned, as if their inhabitants had decided to leave one morning and never return. Until now, there is no single, generally accepted explanation for what exactly led to such a dramatic end to such a developed and seemingly stable civilization. Among the hypotheses discussed are changes in the course of the Indus River, a vital artery that could lead to droughts in some areas and devastating floods in others, climate change, in particular, long periods of droughts that could make agriculture unviable, salinization of soils due to excessive irrigation, environmental problems such as deforestation for agricultural purposes, brick production, or even internal social and economic tensions that led to decentralization and the collapse of the system. Some suggest that the migration of Indo-Aryan tribes may have played a role, but there is no archaeological evidence of a mass invasion. This makes the Harappan civilization one of the most striking examples of a sudden and inexplicable disappearance in the history of mankind, a challenge for archaeologists and historians who are trying to understand what exactly broke the thread of its development. The secrets of her writing and downfall remain silent witnesses on the banks of the Indus, reminding us of the past, how fragile the greatness of even the most organized societies is. The Khmer people, the mystery of stone cities and quiet care. In the heart of Southeast Asia, amid the humid jungles of modern-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, the powerful Khmer Empire flourished from the 9th to the 15th centuries. It was a civilization whose greatness was expressed in colossal stone structures and a complex hydraulic system designed to curb monsoon rains. Their history is one of grandiose ambition, religious fervor, and ultimately a mysterious upadka that left behind only majestic ruins consumed by tropical vegetation. The most striking symbol of their power is Angkor Wat, not just a temple, but a whole city, a temple dedicated to Vishnu, which has become the greatest religious monument in the world. The heyday of the Khmer Empire was associated with the cult of Devaraja, the god-king, who inspired monarchs to build unprecedented temple complexes, symbolizing their divine origin and cosmic order. The founder of the Ano Empire is traditionally considered to be Jayavarman II, who proclaimed himself Devaraja in the early 9th century. Since then, over the course of several centuries, Khmer rulers have created true wonders of architecture. In addition to Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom with its striking Bana faces, Preah Khan Temple and many other structures were built, decorated with thousands of intricate bas-reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu mythology, battles, and everyday life. These structures were built without the use of mortar, with an incredible accuracy of fitting stone blocks, which still amazes engineers. The Khmer people also developed an ingenious and complex water management system consisting of huge reservoirs, barrages, canals, and dams. And this system allowed water to be collected during the rainy season and distributed during the dry period, providing up to 3 rice harvests a year and supporting a huge population in a region that would otherwise be prone to droughts and floods. The Khmer people had their own developed written language based on the Indian script and developed an extensive literature in Sanskrit in the ancient Khmer language. Their society was highly hierarchical, with centralized governance and a powerful army that allowed them to dominate neighboring states and expand their borders. However, in the 15th century, after centuries of prosperity, the Khmer Empire declined, and its majestic capitals, including Angkor itself, were gradually abandoned and swallowed up by the jungle. The final blow was dealt in 1431, when Thai troops from Ayutthaya sacked Angkor, after which the capital was moved to the south, and the once powerful temple cities were emptied. The main mystery lies not so much in the fact of their decline, but in the complex of reasons that led to such a complete and relatively rapid collapse of such a powerful and developed civilization. Traditional hypotheses include military defeats and constant wars with neighboring peoples, especially the Thais, which weakened the empire and depleted its resources. Changes in trade routes, as the development of maritime trade diverted resources from the inland river routes on which Angkor's power was based, and internal religious shifts, the shift from Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism, which may have undermined the cult of Devaraja and centralized power, leading to reduced motivation to maintain giant irrigation systems and build temples. However, there are also deeper ecological and socioeconomic versions. Angkor's huge population, estimated to have reached 1 million at its peak, making it the largest city in the pre-industrial era, required enormous resources. Excessive deforestation for construction and fuel could lead to soil erosion and instability of the hydraulic system. Climate change, particularly prolonged periods of drought alternating with heavy monsoon rains, could have led to the collapse of a complex irrigation system, causing famine and mass migrations. Some researchers speak of a hydraulic collapse when a complex but fragile water supply system has failed to withstand environmental or management pressures. In addition, the constant raids of neighbors, power struggles within the ruling elite, and perhaps epidemics could play a role. The Khmer Empire did not completely disappear, and the Khmer people still live today. But its golden age, its majestic stone cities, and its cosmic ambitions were swallowed up in the jungle and forgotten for centuries, until archaeologists rediscovered them. Their story is a warning of how even the most monumental achievements can be destroyed by a combination of external threats and internal fragility. Maya, a jungle-shrouded calendar of stars. Deep in the heart of Central America, among the impenetrable evergreen jungles that now cover southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, from 2000 BC until the tragic arrival of European invaders in the 16th century, one of the most vibrant, intellectually advanced, and at the same time mysterious civilizations flourished New World Mayan civilization. Unlike centralized empires such as the Aztecs or Incas, the Maya were a complex, dynamic network of independent city-states that, despite frequent political intrigue and bloody conflicts among themselves, shared a common culture, a common language, similar religious beliefs, and, most surprisingly, shared and strikingly accurate scientific and astronomical data. Knowledge. Their mounds are not only monumental pyramids looking up into the sky, but also the deepest understanding of time, the most complex mathematics, and a unique cosmology. The true heyday of the Maya came during the period known as the Classical period, approximately 250 to 900 AD, when such majestic and impressive cities as the legendary Tikal, the exquisite Palenque, the Copan Cultural Center, and the later built but equally significant Chichen Itza were built. These cities were not just settlements. They were grandiose ceremonial centers with towering pyramid temples, elaborate palace complexes, precisely oriented observatories to track the movements of celestial bodies, and sites for sacred ball games that had deep religious and mythological significance. The Maya were consummate masters of architecture and sculpture, creating incredible limestone structures decorated with thousands of intricate reliefs depicting scenes from their mythology, heroic battles, rituals, and everyday life. They developed a unique and extremely complex writing system, the hieroglyphic one, which is still admired for its beauty, depth, and linguistic richness. On carved stelae, elaborate altars, burial chambers, and the few surviving codices, they carefully recorded their history, creation myths, elaborate genealogies of rulers, and, of course, their astounding astronomical observations. However, their greatest achievement was undoubtedly the development of an extremely complex and stunningly accurate calendar system. The Maya used not just one, but several interconnected calendars, including the sacred Solcan, 260 days used for rituals, the civil Hab, 365 days close to the solar year, and the long count, which allowed them to track huge periods of time, measuring cycles dating back millions of years. Their calendar calculations were so precise that they could predict solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable punctuality, and their mathematical system, unique for its time, used the concept of zero long before it appeared in Europe, which allowed them to perform complex astronomical calculations and predict the cycles of the planets. The Maya culture was deeply religious, and their vast pantheon included many gods associated with nature, the sun and the sun, rain, fertility, and death. Religious rituals, which included human sacrifice, played a central role in their daily and political life. But around 900 AD, during a period known as the collapse of the classical Maya, something dramatic and still unexplained happened. Most of the majestic cities of the southern lowlands were suddenly abandoned. The majestic ceremonial centers that had flourished for many centuries fell into a deep silence, slowly but inexorably swallowed up by the advancing jungle. Large-scale construction of monumental structures suddenly stopped. The population of these cities declined sharply, and the complex political structure based on local rulers collapsed. The main mystery lies precisely in the reason for this dramatic and large-scale decline. Why did a civilization that had reached such heights in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture suddenly collapse and its population dispersed? So far, there is no single, universal, and convincing explanation. Among the traditional rational hypotheses, there are several main factors that may have worked together: excessive population growth and resource depletion. Constant population growth in city-states may have led to over-exploitation of the environment. Intensive farming, especially slash and burn farming, in tropical forests could lead to soil degradation, depletion, and erosion. Large-scale deforestation for timber production, for construction and lime production, has led to a change in the microclimate, reduced precipitation, and a shortage of fertile land. Prolonged droughts. Paleoclimatology data obtained from the study of bottom sediments of lakes and speleothems indicate several periods of severe and prolonged droughts that occurred during the collapse of the classical Maya. The lack of rain could undermine the agricultural base, causing widespread hunger and lack of drinking water, which in turn led to population migration. Internecine wars. Epigraphic data show that the late classical period saw an increase in the number and intensity of military conflicts between Mayan city-states. These constant wars for resources, territories, and sacrificial prisoners could deplete their strength, resources, and social stability, destroying trade routes and leading to depopulation. Social unrest or uprisings. Perhaps the oppression of the lower strata of the population, the increase in taxes and labor duties necessary to maintain the elite and build monumental structures, led to internal conflicts, uprisings, and a weakening of the central government. However, none of these theories alone can fully explain the extent of the collapse, which affected almost the entire southern lowlands region. Many researchers are leaning toward the idea that a combination of factors created a perfect storm that undermined the sustainability of Mayan society. For example, droughts may have exacerbated the effects of overpopulation, leading to conflicts over remaining resources and then social unrest. On the other hand, there are more speculative, almost mystical versions or legends. Some Native American traditions speak of curses that befell the Maya for disturbing the balance with nature or for excessive pride of the rulers. Is it possible that their deep knowledge of the cycles of time, encoded in their calendars, foresaw the inevitable end of one of the great cycles that they were unable to prevent? Were these really divine signs, or just the fatalism inherent in their worldview? The secrets of the disappearance of the classic Maya still whisper on the winds among the overgrown ruins of their abandoned cities, reminding us of the fragility of even the greatest achievements of humanity in the face of a changing climate, internal conflicts in their own nature. Their legacy, although shrouded in mystery, continues to amaze and inspire us, forcing us to think about the limits of human power and the mysteries of time. The Roman Empire, an eternal city and a breath of oblivion. In the annals of history, there is no empire greater, more influential, or perhaps more famous than the Roman Empire. Originating from a modest city-state on 7 hills, Rome dominated most of the known world for more than 1,000 years, from the city's founding in 753 BC to the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, or even 2 millennia until the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire in Ascantia in 1453. A world that stretches from Britain to the Middle East, its influence on Western civilization cannot be overstated. It permeates our laws, language, architecture, politics, and even thought itself. Rome seemed designed to last forever, its power unbreakable, and its culture an inexhaustible source of inspiration that promised immortality. The heyday of the Roman Empire was the Pax Romana era, when peace, trade, and culture flourished under its auspices, and cities throughout the empire were connected by a single administrative and economic network. The Romans were brilliant engineers and builders. They built an extensive network of paved roads that connected the entire empire, stretching for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and many of which, surprisingly, are still in use today. Their aqueducts, such as the majestic Pont du Gard in France, provide cities with clean water, and their bridges, forums, thermal baths, and of course the monumental Colosseum and the ingenious Pantheon, an engineering marvel with the world's largest unsupported concrete dome, have become symbols of their architectural grandeur and ability for large-scale projects. The Romans developed a complex legal system that formed the basis of modern Western law, with universal concepts of property rights, citizenship, and judicial procedure that still form the basis of many legal systems. Their Latin language became the basis for all Romance languages and had a huge, incalculable influence on English, enriching its vocabulary and grammar. They were outstanding military strategists. Their legions, they were an invincible force, capable of conquering and holding vast territories, suppressing rebellions and imposing Roman order. The Roman Empire brought together diverse cultures under its control, creating a single economic and cultural space that enabled an unprecedented exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods across the Mediterranean. Their administrative system, based on a well-developed bureaucracy and provincial governance, was incredibly effective for its time, allowing them to control a huge territory. However, despite its apparent greatness and immortality, The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. This collapse was a slow, painful process that spanned several centuries, not a sudden event like a shipwreck. The main mystery lies in the complex of interrelated reasons that led to the fall of such a powerful power, capable of enduring millennia. There wasn't a single meteor strike or a single enemy capable of destroying it. Among the most frequently discussed reasons are the constant barbarian invasions, the endless raids of Germanic tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Huns, migrating under pressure from other peoples, gradually depleted Roman resources and weakened its borders, forcing Rome to wage continuous, grueling wars that were prohibitively expensive and distracted soldiers from agricultural work. At the same time, there was economic decline, hyperinflation, agricultural degradation due to wars and lack of new conquests, which have traditionally been the source of slaves and wealth, reduced trade activity, excessive taxes on the population, and the inability to maintain extensive infrastructure. The gap between rich and poor was growing, leading to unbearable social instability. Political instability and corruption also played a role. The frequent succession of emperors, many of whom were killed, endless power struggles, corruption in the bureaucracy, the weakening of the central government, and the exorbitant rise of the army, which often installed its own protégés on the throne, destroyed state institutions from within. Social and cultural changes must not be forgotten. The decline of civic virtues, the demographic decline due to repeated epidemics, the decline in the birth rate, and the gradual assimilation of barbarians into the army, which led to a decrease in its discipline and loyalty. Some historians also point to the rise of Christianity, which in their view distracted citizens from serving the state and weakened the old Roman traditions. Perhaps the empire was simply too large to be effectively managed and protected, especially when using the relatively primitive means of communication and transportation of the time, which led to its inevitable overexertion. However, there are also deeper, almost philosophical or mystical versions or traditions that try to explain the end of the eternal Rome. Some speak of moral decay, when luxury, decadence, and the loss of ancient Roman values undermine the spirit of the nation, depriving it of internal strength. Were they curses from the old gods for abandoning them in favor of a new religion? Some mystically inclined authors claim that Rome was not just an empire, but a sacred center. Its fall was determined by cosmic cycles or changes in the spiritual energy of the planet that led to its extinction. Or was it the inevitable result of the internal fatigue of a civilization that reached its peak and simply could not develop further, could not adapt to new challenges, and lost the very will to live? Rome did not completely disappear. Its legacy is still alive today. Its laws and language still shape our world. But its political and military greatness, its unified imperial formula, disappeared, leaving only ruins and countless questions about how even the most powerful creation of man can be so fragile in the face of time and internal contradictions. Ancient Egypt, the gift of the Nile and the mystery of extinction. On the banks of the majestic Nile, the pulsating artery of life that cuts through the vast expanses of deserts, one of the most durable, stable, and iconic civilizations in the history of mankind. Ancient Egypt emerged, having existed for almost 3 millennia, from 3100 BC, when Upper and Lower Egypt were united under the rule of the first pharaoh, to the conquest of Alexander the Great in 332 BC, Egypt left an indelible mark on the history, culture, and imagination of people. Its colossal pyramids, mysterious sphinxes, mysterious mummies, and complex hieroglyphs have become symbols of antiquity, eternity, and unfathomable mystery. The Egyptians built their temples and tombs, believing in an afterlife with incredible persistence, as if they knew that their legacy would live on forever, outliving them. The heyday of ancient Egypt was marked by the creation of a single centralized state under the absolute power of the pharaohs, who were considered not just rulers, but living gods, intermediaries between people and the divine world, ensuring harmony, Mat, in the universe. Their greatest achievements are undoubtedly the monumental structures that still inspire awe. The Great Pyramids of Giza, the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that has survived to this day, are still admired for their scale, engineering accuracy, and the mystery of construction. The majestic temples of Luxor and Karnak, the huge colossi of Memnon, the rock-cut tombs of the Valley of the Kings and Queens are striking in their size. Abundance of colorful paintings and intricate hieroglyphs that recorded history, myths, religious texts, and even everyday scenes. The Egyptians developed a unique and complex hieroglyphic script that was both an art, a religious symbol, and a way to preserve knowledge for posterity. Their understanding of astronomy was strikingly developed. They created one of the first accurate calendars based on the cycles of the Nile and the movement of the star Sirius, which was vital for planning agricultural work. Medicine in ancient Egypt was surprisingly developed for its time, with surgeons specializing in a variety of diseases and a deep knowledge of anatomy gained through the mummification process that allowed them to perform complex operations. Egypt's society was strictly hierarchical, with a pharaoh at the top, a powerful priestly class, influential scribes, disciplined warriors, and a huge mass of peasants whose labor was the foundation of the entire state. The economy was based entirely on agriculture, mostly grain production, which was made possible by the predictable annual flooding of the Nile, which fertilized the soil, making it incredibly fertile. However, despite its phenomenal stability and longevity spanning almost 3 millennia, ancient Egypt as an independent great power has gradually faded away. Its long history is marked by a succession of periods of great prosperity, such as the ancient, middle, and new kingdoms, and deep decline, known as transition periods. But the final collapse did not occur simultaneously, but through a series of successive conquests, beginning with the Persians in the 6th century BC, then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and then the Greeks under Alexander the Great. Finally, the Romans, who finally made Egypt a province of their empire in 30 BC after the defeat of Cleopatra. The main mystery lies not in the fact of conquest, since empires have always come and gone, but in the gradual loss of internal identity and power long before final subjugation. Why did the once great civilization, which had survived for thousands of years and seemed unshakable, fail to resist external forces and, it would seem, lose its inner core? Among the traditional, rational hypotheses about the gradual decline of Egypt, political decentralization and internal conflicts are distinguished. After the powerful periods of the New Kingdom, the power of the pharaohs weakened. Local nomarchs, regional rulers, began to gain more independence, which led to fragmentation, rivalry, and internecine wars, undermining the unity of the state. Economic difficulties also played a role. Reduced Nile flooding, climate change, and the economic burden of maintaining a huge priestly class and constantly building monumental temples could undermine the economy and impoverish the population. Constant external intrusions and domination. They were a constant challenge. Egypt was invaded by the Hyksos, the mysterious peoples of the sea, the Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians. Although it often regained its independence after such invasions, each of them weakened it, led to the loss of territories, depleted resources, and forced it to adopt foreign customs. In the last centuries of its independence, Egypt effectively became a province of more powerful empires, losing its sovereignty. Finally, some researchers point to technological stagnation. Unlike other civilizations, Egypt seemed to reach its technological and cultural peak relatively early, and then showed a slow pace of innovation, especially in the military sphere and in the development of new production methods, which made it vulnerable to more advanced and dynamic opponents. However, there are more mystical or symbolic explanations that attempt to make sense of this slow decline. Some speak of god fatigue, or a gradual loss of connection with the cosmos, which according to Egyptian cosmology was vital for maintaining order, prosperity, and eternity. Was it the exhaustion of sacred energy that fueled their belief in the afterlife and allowed them to build colossal pyramids? Or the gradual oblivion of ancient knowledge and rituals, which led to a weakening of the spiritual strength of the nation and its ability to resist? Ancient Egypt did not disappear without a trace. Its monuments are still standing, and its symbols are recognizable all over the world. But the heart of this civilization, its unique political, religious, and cultural autonomy, gradually faded, turning into only a shadow of its former greatness, leaving behind only quiet sighs of sand, hiding millions of unsolved secrets. Mycenaean civilization, fortresses in the oblivion of the Dark Ages. In the rocky expanses of mainland Greece, after the mysterious disappearance of the Minoan civilization, from about 1600 to 1100 BC, a new militant and mysterious culture flourished, the Mycenaean civilization. It was a society known for its massive, impregnable fortresses such as Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, as if carved out of the earth itself. Unlike the peace-loving Minoans, the Mycenaeans were skilled warriors whose culture was imbued with a military spirit, and their influence extended far beyond Greece, reaching the islands of the Aegean Sea and the coast of Asia Minor. It was their exploits and tragedies, reinterpreted centuries later, that formed the basis of Homer's great epic poems, the Iliad and Odyssey, giving them immortality and myth even when their cities were swallowed up in oblivion. The rise of Mycenaean civilization was associated with the strengthening of the power of the warlord kings, or vanish, who ruled from their Cyclopean fortresses. These fortresses, built of huge, uncut stones, were so massive that later generations of Greeks believed that they were built by mythological cyclopes. Inside these walls were palaces decorated with colorful frescoes depicting hunting, battles, and religious processions, reminiscent of Minoan influence, but with a distinctly warlike character. The Minoans used linear B writing, an early form of Greek that, unlike linear A, was deciphered and turned out to be a system of administrative records relating to resource allocation, land holdings, and military forces. These tablets give us a valuable insight into their complex bureaucracy and economy. The Mycenaeans were skilled metalworkers, especially in working bronze, creating magnificent armor, weapons, and golden funerary masks such as the famous Mask of Agamemnon. They traded extensively with the peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean, importing raw materials and exporting their wares. Their society was strictly hierarchical, with a king at the head, surrounded by aristocracy, priests and warriors, and most of the population engaged in agriculture and crafts. They also developed a complex system of funerary rites, including impressive beehive-like tholos designed for the burial of nobles. However, around 1200 BC, Mycenaean civilization suddenly and dramatically collapsed, ushering in the so-called Greek Dark Ages, a period lasting about 3 centuries, about which we have very little information. Powerful fortresses were destroyed, cities were abandoned, populations plummeted, the linear B writing system disappeared, and art declined. The main mystery lies precisely in the causes of this large-scale collapse, which affected not only Mycenae, but also many other civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean at that time. This was not just a local crisis, but a systemic collapse. Traditional hypotheses include invasion of the Sea Peoples. Mysterious Sea Peoples mentioned in Egyptian sources may have made devastating raids on the coast, destroying cities and disrupting trade routes. However, their identity and the extent of the destruction are still controversial. Dorian invasion. According to ancient Greek legends, Greek Dorian tribes from the north invaded the Peloponnese, destroying Mycenaean centers. Archaeological evidence for this invasion is mixed, and many scientists doubt that it was the sole cause. Internal revolts and internecine wars. It is possible that the constant conflicts between Mycenaean city-states, the struggle for power and resources, and the oppression of the lower strata of the population led to a weakening and internal disintegration of society. Natural disasters, strong earthquakes, which often occur in this seismically active region, could destroy fortresses and cities, undermining their stability. However, all these hypotheses seem insufficient to explain such a complete and synchronous collapse. Unconventional or complex explanations include economic collapse due to disruption of trade routes and degradation of a complex centralized economic system, climate change, including droughts or long periods of cold weather that could lead to crop failures and famine, or even systemic collapse, when a variety of small factors, wars, natural disasters, climate change, etc., are considered. Internal problems coincided, creating a domino effect that destroyed the entire complex structure of Mycenaean society. Some scholars suggest that the fall of the Mycenaeans was part of a broader Bronze Age collapse that affected the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Mycenaean civilization did not completely disappear, but its cities and complex social structure were destroyed, and the population dispersed, plunged into several centuries of darkness, from which Greece emerged with a new culture that laid the foundations of our civilization, but silently asking about the fate of its predecessors. The Hittites, the Iron Empire, and the vanishing of the curtain. On the Anatolian Plateau in the territory of modern Turkey, from the 16th to the 47th centuries BC, one of the greatest but now almost forgotten empires of the ancient East flourished, the Hittite Empire. It was a powerful power that for centuries vied with ancient Egypt and Babylonia for dominance in the Middle East. Their greatness was based not only on their military might, but also on their unique political and legal systems. While other civilizations mainly used bronze, the Hittites were among the first to master the production and processing of iron, which gave them a significant military advantage and left an imprint on the entire history of the region. The heyday of the Hittite Empire is associated with cities such as their capital Hattusa, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Hattusa was not just a city, but an impregnable fortress with massive walls, majestic gates decorated with lions and sphinxes, and a complex system of underground tunnels. The Hittites were known for their military achievements, especially the use of chariots, which were their striking force in battle. The culmination of their power was the Battle of Kadesh, c. 1274 BC, against the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II, which is considered one of the largest chariot battles in history and ended with the first ever written peace treaty. The Hittites had their own cuneiform script, which was written in Akkadian, the international language of diplomacy at the time, and in their own Indo-European Hittite language, as well as in Luwian and other Anatolian languages. Their archives found in Hattus include thousands of clay tablets containing state treaties, historical records, legal codes, religious texts, and literary works that provide invaluable insight into their culture. The Hittite legal code was less severe than the famous Hammurabi Code and emphasized compensation rather than corporal punishment, suggesting a more humane approach to justice. They were skilled artisans, especially in metallurgy, and their achievements in iron processing were revolutionary for their time. The political structure of the Hittite Empire was unique. The king was not an absolute monarch. His power was limited to the Council of Nobles, Pancus, which made their system closer to the constitutional monarchy than to the Eastern despotisms. However, by about 1180 BC, after several centuries of domination, the Hittite Empire suddenly and dramatically collapsed, and its capital Hattusa was destroyed and abandoned. Most of its territory was devastated, and the Hittite language and culture disappeared from the historical scene, plunging into oblivion for several millennia, until they were rediscovered by archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries. The main mystery lies in the reason for this rapid and complete collapse, which led to the disappearance of one of the greatest powers of the Bronze Age. Traditional rational hypotheses include invasion of the peoples of the sea. As with the Mycenaeans, these mysterious sea peoples may have made devastating raids on the Hittite coast and interior, destroying cities and disrupting trade routes. Invasion of the Khazars. These warlike tribes from the north constantly threatened the borders of the Hittite Empire and could deliver a decisive blow. Internal conflicts and dynastic strife, prolonged internecine wars and struggles for the throne could weaken the central government and undermine the unity of the empire from within. Droughts and famines. Some studies suggest that the late Bronze Age Middle East experienced long periods of droughts that could have led to mass starvation and depopulation. However, as in the case of Mycenae, none of these reasons alone can fully explain such a large-scale and synchronous collapse. Many researchers are inclined to the idea of a Bronze Age systemic collapse, when a whole complex of interrelated factors, such as climate change, mass migrations, disruption of trade networks, internal conflicts, and external invasions, coincided, creating a domino effect that destroyed the entire complex structure of existing civilizations. The Hittites were one of the key players in this complex international system. Perhaps their dependence on imports of some key resources, such as copper and tin, has made them vulnerable to disruption of trade routes. Or else their advanced knowledge of iron, which they sought to keep secret, eventually became useless when their enemies also mastered the technology. The Hittite Empire didn't just collapse, it faded from memory for centuries, as if a curtain had come down, hiding its greatness and the secret of its fall from the world, leaving only the soft whisper of ancient ruins waiting for us to fully decipher their silent stories. Punt, land of incense and sea mysteries. Somewhere on the east coast of Africa, in what the ancient Egyptians reverently called the land of Punt, there was a mysterious, fabulously rich kingdom whose untold wealth and exotic gifts inspired the most powerful pharaohs to mount expensive and risky sea expeditions through the dangerous waters of the Red Sea. Punt, which existed between the 3rd millennium BC and the middle of the 1st millennium BC, was not an empire in the classical sense, like Egypt or Babylon. Rather, it was a conglomerate of lands that provided an inexhaustible source of unique goods, and perhaps a developed trading power whose precise geographical location and political nature are still the subject of heated debate and scholarly debate among historians and archaeologists. It is referred to in ancient Egyptian texts with an almost mythical connotation as a faraway land, from which precious myrrh, incense, native gold, ebony, glittering ivory, the skins of fierce leopards and live exotic animals, such as monkeys and giraffes, were brought unseen in the lands of the Nile. This aura of richness, remoteness, and elusiveness, combined with the complete lack of direct, irrefutable archaeological evidence on the site, makes Punt one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. It's like a ghost hovering over the sands and waves. Egypt's relations with Punt truly flourished during the Middle and New Kingdoms, when the power of the pharaohs reached its peak, allowing them to equip grandiose merchant fleets. The most striking and most informative evidence of Punt is the unique, incredibly detailed reliefs that adorn the walls of the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut in Deir el-Bahri, dated to about 1479-1458 BC. These reliefs represent a whole visual chronicle, depicting in detail a large-scale sea expedition to this distant and mysterious land. They show striking details, villages built on stilts above the water to protect themselves from floods or enemies, characteristic trees from which precious myrrh was extracted, the main item of trade, and images of the inhabitants of Punta themselves, including their fat king and queen, which in Egyptian culture was a symbol of wealth and well-being. These images, despite their Egyptian interpretation, are indisputably indicative of a thriving society with a developed culture, unique natural resources, and probably a complex social structure. The inhabitants of Punt, judging by the Egyptian images, were dark-skinned, with characteristic hairstyles and jewelry, which clearly indicates their African origin. They were obviously skilled sailors, capable of long-distance voyages on dangerous seas, the waters of the Red Sea and possibly even the Indian Ocean, delivering their precious goods to Egypt. Although archaeological expeditions have yet to find definitive and undisputed ruins of the cities of Punta, due to its presumed location on the coast of present-day Eritrea, Somalia, or even Yemen, where ancient structures may have been swallowed up by the advancing desert, submerged by the tides, or destroyed by subsequent civilizations, the very existence of such a stable and rich trade connection over many centuries indicates that the existence of a developed social organization, stable political structure, and significant economic power. Punt was not just a territory, but an idealized, almost mythical source of incalculable wealth, a kind of paradise on earth in Egyptian ideas. Its exotic status only served to enhance its mystery and appeal to the imagination of the ancient Egyptians. However, by about 1100 BC, after several centuries of active and mutually beneficial trade relations, references to the land of Punt gradually disappeared from Egyptian records. Grandiose trading expeditions stop, and the Punt seems to disappear into the fog of history, leaving behind only intriguing questions and a sense of incompleteness. The main and deepest secret of its disappearance is not some catastrophic destruction or conquest, but a complete and silent cessation of contact and subsequent oblivion. What happened to this mysterious land of incense? Among the traditional rational hypotheses about the termination of contacts with Punt, the change in the political situation in Egypt itself stands out. The weakening of the central government during the Third Transition period and the late kingdom led to the fact that the pharaohs no longer had sufficient resources and organizational capabilities to equip such expensive and risky long-distance sea expeditions. Their focus shifted to domestic issues and defense against ground incursions. It is also possible to change trade routes. With the development of overland caravan routes or the emergence of new maritime powers in the region, it is possible that new trade routes overland or through other maritime regions have become more profitable, safer, or simply more efficient, reducing the economic need for long-distance sea travel to Punt. Environmental changes could play a critical role. Prolonged droughts or irreversible climate changes in the Punta region could deplete natural resources such as myrrh and frankincense, making trade with it less attractive or even impossible for both sides. If resources have dried up, then trading has lost its meaning. Finally, the emergence of new trading powers or empires. In the Red Sea or Indian Ocean region, they could seize control of trade routes, ousting Punt from its monopoly position, or simply absorbing it within their expanding spheres of influence, erasing its independence and identity. However, given Punt's complete disappearance from the historical record, there are more speculative or even legendary versions. Since Punt has never been clearly identified archaeologically, some researchers suggest that it may not have been so much a single, centralized kingdom as a vast geographical area with several disparate tribes or small trading settlements that simply stopped trading with Egypt for internal reasons, for example, due to tribal conflicts, social upheaval, or climate change religious beliefs. Some ancient traditions of East Africa speak of the mass movement of ancient trading peoples, or that they simply moved inland, leaving the coastal areas due to climate change or external pressure. Was it a kind of cultural isolation or a conscious decision to cut off contact with the outside world after certain events that we will never know? Or did this kingdom, so heavily dependent on its unique natural resources, simply run out of them, leading to its inevitable economic collapse and the collapse of its social structure? Punt disappeared not with the rumble of conquest or natural disaster, but with a slight, almost inaudible whisper, like a mist that lifted over the Red Sea, leaving behind an extra mysterious Egyptian frescoes and a deep mystery. Where is this legendary land of incense? And why is its silence so absolute that it is erased from the pages of history? The Akkadian Empire, the first empire in the mystery of the Great Drought. In the heart of Mesopotamia, in the lands where the scattered but culturally rich Sumerian city-states once flourished, the first large, centrally organized, multi-ethnic state in human history, the Akkadian Empire, emerged around 2334 BC like a sudden stare. Its founder was the legendary Sargon of Akkad, whose story of ascent from humble, almost mythical origins to absolute ruler of a vast power became one of the greatest heroic epics of antiquity. He united all Sumerian cities under his iron hand, from Eridu to Kish, and extended his power from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean coast, creating a vast power whose influence extended to the entire Middle East and beyond. Akkadians, unlike the Sumerians, spoke a Semitic language, and their empire was the first example in history of a multicultural, multilingual state that managed to unite different ethnic groups and languages under a single administrative system. The true heyday of the Akkadian Empire was marked by unprecedented military conquests and groundbreaking administrative changes that laid the foundations for future empires. Sargon of Akkad not only conquered, but also created the first permanent professional army in history, the number of which, according to some sources, reached 5,400 people, an impressive force for that time. With its help, he conquered many city-states, demolished their defensive walls, and established a single authority, placing Akkadian governors loyal to him at the head of these cities rather than local rulers. The capital of the empire, the mysterious city of Akkad, whose exact location is still one of the greatest archaeological mysteries, is described as a majestic center where untold riches from all over the empire flocked, tribute and trade revenues. The Akkadians, being a pragmatic and adaptable people, completely adopted and adapted Sumerian cuneiform script for their Akkadian language, giving it new forms and meanings. They also created their own unique art form, especially in sculpture and reliefs, which was more realistic, expressive, and dynamic than the more stylized Sumerian art. For example, the famous bronze head of Sargon, or perhaps his grandson Naram-Sin, is an undisputed masterpiece of ancient art, demonstrating incredible craftsmanship. The empire of Sargon and his brilliant successors, especially his grandson Naram-Sin, who considered himself a god and assumed the unprecedented title of King of the Four Cardinal Directions. A claim to world domination set new revolutionary standards for imperial governance by centralizing the economy and administration, appointing loyal officials and governors to each of the conquered provinces. They created a unified system of standardized weights and measures, which greatly contributed to the development of trade and the stability of the economy. Akkadians also contributed to Mesopotamian mythology by creating heroic epics and myths that celebrated their kings, warriors, and powerful gods, cementing their legitimacy and greatness. However, after about 150 years of unprecedented power and glory, the Akkadian Empire suddenly and dramatically collapsed around 2154 BC. The city of Akkad was destroyed and abandoned, and paradoxically, its location has not yet been found, as if it was wiped off the face of the earth by some incomprehensible cataclysm. The vast empire's territory broke up into many melkiks, warring kingdoms, and there was a period of anarchy and chaos known as the Dark Ages, before Sumerian cities such as re-entered the historical scene to restore Sumerian greatness. The main and most intriguing mystery lies in the reason for such a rapid, total, and complete collapse of this first centralized empire in history, which it would seem possessed inexhaustible resources and military power. It wasn't just a slow fade, but an instant, almost shocking collapse. Among the traditional rational hypotheses about the fall of Akkad, one of the most frequently mentioned is the invasion of the Gutians. These primitive but warlike mountain tribes that lived on the fringes of the empire are often cited as the main culprits. According to some Sumerian sources, the Gutians made devastating raids into Mesopotamia, destroying cities, looting temples, and paralyzing Economica. However, their real role in the total collapse of the Akkadian Empire is still debated, as their military power may have been exaggerated in later Sumerian texts. Another reason is internal revolts and separatism. Akkad's centralized and sometimes brutal governance was alien to many of the conquered Sumerian city-states, which constantly sought independence and rebelled. Constant rebellions and the inability to effectively control vast AI territories could drain the empire from within, undermining its unity. The theory of inefficient management and overexertion is also considered. Perhaps the empire of Sargon and Naram-Sin was simply too large and too centralized for the technological level of that time, and its administrative and logistics system simply could not withstand the load, which led to administrative chaos, corruption, and inability to maintain order and supply. However, in recent decades, more and more attention has been paid to an unconventional but very convincing hypothesis based on paleoclimatic studies. Large-scale climate change, in particular, catastrophic and prolonged drought. Studies of ice cores from Greenland, marine sediments from the Gulf of Oman, and studies of pollen in ancient lake sediments have shown that around 2200 BC, the entire Middle East experienced a sharp, unprecedented, and prolonged, possibly up to 300 years, period of severe drought, which led to a significant reduction in precipitation, lowering water levels, and reducing water pollution in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and the drying up of fertile land. This would have truly disastrous consequences for irrigation-based agriculture, causing mass starvation, epidemics, widespread depopulation, social unrest, mass migrations, and ultimately a complete collapse of central government. A drought could have weakened the empire so much that it became easy prey for the Gutians, or simply collapsed due to internal instability. Stability caused by famine and lack of resources. Some scholars suggest that Sargon and Naram-Sin, seeing the impending problems, tried to solve them by military methods, but faced the inexorable, all-consuming force of nature. In ancient Sumerian and Akkadian texts, There are myths about the curse of Akkad that befell Naram Sin for desecrating the temple of Enlil in Nippur, which led to the wrath of the gods and disaster. Was it a mythological reflection of a real, devastating ecological cataclysm that was interpreted as divine retribution? The mystery of the disappearance of the Akkadian Empire, its great capital, which is still hidden under the sands of time, and its collapse caused, perhaps not by a human hand, but by the overwhelming wrath of nature, remains one of the most instructive and disturbing examples of how even the most powerful human construct can be helpless in the face of global climate change. Ancient China, dynasties, the heavenly mandate, and cycles of decline. On the vast plains of East Asia, watered by the Great Yellow River and Yangtze, one civilization was born and flourished from ancient times, whose history, unlike many others, did not disappear but developed continuously for thousands of years. Ancient China. Although China itself did not disappear as such, its history is replete with the ups and downs of powerful dynasties that followed each other in a cyclical rhythm that historians call the dynastic cycle. Each of these dynasties, like a separate civilization, arose, reached its apogee, and then, for various reasons, fell into decline and was replaced by a new one. This continuous process of transformation, rather than complete disappearance, is a unique mystery of Chinese history. How the culture managed to maintain its identity despite countless internal crises and external invasions. The rise of every great dynasty in ancient China was marked by consolidation of power, grandiose construction projects, and a flourishing culture. From the mythical Xia and early Shang to the later and well-documented Zhou, Qin, Han, Tang, Song, Ming, and Qin, each dynasty left its own indelible mark. The Chinese were pioneers in many areas. They invented paper, gunpowder, the compass, and printing long before the West, and their achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine were astounding. The Great Wall of China, a colossal defensive structure that stretches for thousands of kilometers, is a symbol of their engineering genius and ability to organize large-scale work. Cities such as Chang'an and Luoyang were the largest megacities of their time, centers of commerce, culture, and politics. Chinese philosophy, represented by Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism, has formed a unique worldview that emphasizes harmony, hierarchy, and stability. The political system was based on the concept of the mandate of heaven, Qianming, according to which the ruler received the right to power from heaven, but could lose it if he ruled unfairly or ineffectively, which led to cataclysms and uprisings, being a legitimation for changing dynasties. A complex bureaucratic system based on meritocracy and examinations for officials ensured the relative stability of the administration of the vast empire. However, each of these great dynasties, having reached its apogee, inevitably faced a period of decline and eventually disappeared as a ruling force, giving way to a new one. These falls were rarely instantaneous. They were the result of a complex interplay of internal and external factors that gradually eroded the foundation of the empire. The main mystery here is not why dynasties succeeded each other. This explains the concept of the mandate of heaven, but the universal patterns of these collapses and the unique ability of Chinese civilization to revive after each of them, preserving its cultural identity. Among the common causes of the fall of dynasties in ancient China, overpopulation and the agrarian crisis can be distinguished. Population growth often outstripped the possibilities of agriculture, leading to a shortage of land, starvation, and impoverishment of the peasantry. This gave rise to social discontent and mass uprisings, corruption and mismanagement. As the dynasty aged, the central government often became more corrupt and less effective. Eunuchs, minions, and powerful families could seize power, undermining the emperor's authority and draining the treasury. Excessive taxes and labor duties to finance wars, luxury palaces, and grandiose projects such as the Great Wall or canals. The government increased taxes and required excessive labor duties, which led to the ruin of the people and mass uprisings. Natural disasters. China has often suffered from floods, especially due to the Yellow River floods. droughts, earthquakes, and epidemics. These disasters, combined with the government's failure to provide assistance, were seen as signs that the heavens had turned away from the ruling dynasty. External invasions and threats, nomadic tribes from the north, Xiongnu, Mongols, Manchus, constantly posed a threat to the Chinese borders. Weakened by internal problems, dynasties were often unable to resist these invasions, resulting in the loss of territory and eventual fall, strengthening of local military leaders and provincialism. As central power weakened, local governors and military leaders often gained strength, creating their own armies and effectively becoming independent rulers, leading to fragmentation and civil wars. For example, the fall of the Han Dynasty, 206 BC, 220 AD, was the result of a combination of overpopulation, land crisis, the Yellow Armband Rebellion, the struggle of eunuchs and learned officials, and the subsequent fragmentation into the three kingdoms. The fall of the Tang Dynasty, 689-07, is associated with the An Lushan Rebellion, the strengthening of regional military governors, and nomad raids. The Ming Dynasty, 1368-1644, collapsed due to internal peasant uprisings, led by Li Zicheng, corruption, economic problems, and, finally, the invasion of the Manchus, who founded the new Qing Dynasty. In each case, it was not a single factor, but a complex perfect storm that undermined the legitimacy and ability of the dynasty to govern. The secret to the longevity of Chinese civilization lies in its unique ability to self-repair and adapt. Despite the collapse of the ruling dynasties, the fundamental institutions, bureaucracy, Confucian philosophy, hieroglyphic writing, and agricultural economics remained relatively stable. The concept of the mandate of heaven made it possible to legitimize the change of power without destroying the very idea of a centralized state. Chinese culture was so strong that even the nomadic conquerors who came to power eventually assimilated and adopted Chinese customs, language, and system of government. Thus, Kitai did not disappear, but was constantly reborn, like a phoenix from the ashes, preserving its unique civilizational DNA, despite the countless deaths of its ruling houses. Sumerians, the cradle of civilization and its oblivion. In the fertile valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now southern Iraq, around 4500 BC, a civilization was born that many historians call the cradle of civilization, Sumer. It was the first society in human history to invent writing, the wheel, irrigation, cities, and perhaps even the first forms of law and statehood. The Sumerians created a complex culture that laid the foundations for all subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations, including Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Their heritage, though hidden under layers of sand for thousands of years, is the foundation of our understanding of the ancient world. Sumer's heyday was marked by the emergence of many independent city-states, such as Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, and Eridu. These cities were not just settlements, but thriving centers with majestic ziggurat temples dedicated to their gods, vast markets, and a complex social structure. The Sumerians invented cuneiform, the earliest known writing system, which allowed them to keep records, write down laws, literature, myths, and historical events on clay tablets. It was a revolutionary achievement that changed the way information is stored and transmitted. They were pioneers in irrigation, creating complex systems of canals and dams to divert water from rivers to agricultural fields, allowing for plentiful grain harvests in the arid region. The Sumerians also invented the wheel, which dramatically changed transportation and military affairs. Their achievements in mathematics, based on the sexagesimal system that is still used in our measurement of time and angles, astronomy, and architecture were outstanding. Sumerian religion was polytheistic, with a rich pantheon of gods and goddesses, each patronizing a particular city or aspect of nature. Their literature, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, is one of the oldest known works of world literature, exploring the eternal themes of life, death, and the search for immortality. Sumer's society was hierarchical, with kings, lugals, priests, scribes, artisans, farmers, and slaves. Despite their cultural unity, Sumerian city-states often fought wars over land and resources, which weakened them. However, by about 2000 BCE, after more than 2 millennia of domination, Sumer, as an independent civilization, had withdrawn from the historical arena. Its cities declined, the Sumerian language was gradually replaced by Akkadian, and Sumer was absorbed into larger Semitic empires such as Babylon and Assyria. The main mystery lies not so much in the fact of its disappearance, since conquests were common in Mesopotamia, but in the gradual cultural and linguistic dissolution of such a fundamental civilization. Among the reasons for the decline of Sumer permanent internecine wars, endless conflicts between Sumerian city-states over control of water resources and fertile lands depleted them, weakened their political and economic stability, and made them vulnerable to external threats. Invasions of Semitic peoples, migrations of Semitic tribes such as the Akkadians, who founded the Akkadian Empire, and Amorites led to the gradual assimilation of the Sumerians. These new peoples introduced their own languages and customs, gradually replacing Sumerian culture. Although Sargon's Akkadian Empire initially united Sumer, its fall led to a temporary revival of Sumerian cities, Third Dynasty of Ur. But this was only a postponement of the inevitable. Environmental problems. Long-term and intensive irrigation in the hot climate of Mesopotamia has led to salinization of the soil. Salt accumulated in the upper layers of the soil, making it unsuitable for growing wheat, the main grain crop. This forced them to switch to less productive barley, reducing agricultural productivity and causing famine. This ecological factor may have been one of the most significant and slow-acting causes of decline. River changes. Natural changes in the Tigris and Euphrates riverbeds may have left some cities without vital water, leading to their abandonment. The Sumerians did not disappear as a result of a single catastrophe like some other civilizations. Their language gradually fell out of use as a spoken language, surviving only as a language of science and religion, like Latin in the Middle Ages, and their cities were absorbed by new empires. Their culture, however, became the foundation for all subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations. Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians adopted Sumerian cuneiform writing, myths, laws, astronomical knowledge, and even many religious practices. Thus, Sumer did not completely perish, but transformed and passed on its legacy farther. The mystery of its disappearance lies in how the civilization that gave rise to so many fundamental innovations gradually lost its political and linguistic identity, disappearing into the waves of subsequent conquerors, but at the same time laid an unshakable cultural foundation for the entire Middle East. His story is an instructive example of how greatness can be assimilated, not destroyed, leaving only a ghostly imprint on the pages of history. Harappan civilization, the lost world of the Indian River and the silent Exodus. Returning to the origins of antiquity, to one of the most mysterious and, alas, least understood great civilizations in the history of mankind, we once again turn our eyes to the lands where Pakistan, northwestern India, and part of Afghanistan are located today. Here in the fertile valley of the Indus River and its tributaries, the grandiose Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley Civilization, flourished between about 2300 and 1300 BC. It was one of the three earliest civilizations of the Old World, along with Sumer and ancient Egypt. But it was radically different in many of its unique features, especially in the context of its almost complete and inexplicable disappearance. What we know about it is mostly based on archaeological finds and excavations, since its written language has not yet been deciphered, which shrouds its entire history, social structure, beliefs, and causes of decline in an impenetrable veil of mystery and conjecture. This silence is one of the most intriguing aspects of its existence, as if its inhabitants have taken their secrets to eternity, leaving us with only the wreckage of their amazing world. The true heyday of Harappan civilization, or the mature Harappan period, 2600–1900 BC, was marked by the construction of surprisingly developed and planned cities that surpassed many European cities in scale, organization, and comfort even in the late Middle Ages. The most famous of them are Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Dholavira. They were not just settlements, but real megacities of their time. These cities impressed the imagination with their well-thought-out urban planning, demonstrating incredible engineering and urban planning skills for that time. The streets were strictly straight, laid out in a perfectly aligned grid, and the buildings were constructed of uniform, baked bricks of standard size, indicating a high level of standardization, centralized control, and possibly effective public administration. Almost every house had access to water supply from wells, and, most surprisingly and truly unique for that time, to a complex sewer and drainage system that effectively diverted sewage from houses and streets, significantly surpassing similar systems even in some European cities of the 19th century. In Mohenjo-Daro, the Great Pool was discovered, a huge, perfectly executed structure laid out with kirpik and covered with bitumen for water resistance. It is assumed that it was used for ritual ablutions, indicating a high level of public hygiene and possibly developed religious practices. Cities also had extensive public grain storage facilities, suggesting centralized economic management and organized, highly efficient agriculture that could feed huge urban populations. The Harappans were skilled artisans, and their skills were shown in the manufacture of exquisite jewelry made of gold, silver, and precious stones, magnificent ceramics, high-quality products made of copper and bronze, as well as ivory and shells. Particularly noteworthy are their seals, small square or rectangular stone products with images of animals, unicorns, elephants, tigers, zebus, and possibly deities, as well as inscriptions in unencrypted writing, which causes endless disputes about the meaning of these symbols. These seals were probably used in trade to mark goods, and their presence in Mesopotamia indicates a developed trade network that stretched for thousands of kilometers by land and sea. An interesting feature of this civilization is the apparent absence of obvious palaces, monumental temples, or images of warrior rulers on a scale comparable to ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. This suggests that Harappan society may have been more egalitarian, perhaps governed by a council of priests, trade elites, or elders, rather than by all-powerful monarchs, which also distinguishes them from many contemporaries. It was a civilization focused on order, trade, crafts, and presumably a peaceful existence, as archaeological evidence suggests a relatively low level of military conflict. However, by about 1900 BC, after several centuries of unprecedented prosperity and stability, the majestic Harappan civilization began to decline and then completely disappeared, as if disappearing into the hot air of the Indus Valley. Its once thriving cities were gradually abandoned rather than destroyed in battle. The complex irrigation system fell into disrepair, the population plummeted or dispersed, and the level of urban culture sharply degraded to simpler forms of existence characterized by smaller settlements and simplified crafts. The main and most painful mystery lies precisely in this silent, almost sudden, inexplicable disappearance. There is no convincing, comprehensive evidence of massive invasions, devastating wars, or large-scale natural disasters that can explain such a complete and dramatic collapse. The cities were not burned or looted as a result of military actions. They were simply gradually abandoned, as if their inhabitants had decided to leave one morning and never return. Until now, there is no single, generally accepted explanation for what exactly led to such a dramatic end to such a developed and seemingly stable civilization. Among the leading hypotheses that are often considered in combination are changes in the course of the Indus River. One of the most popular versions claims that the Indus, a vital artery for civilization, could have changed its course as a result of tectonic activity or silt deposits. This could lead to disastrous consequences. Some regions could be deprived of water and subject to drought, while others could suffer from devastating floods, which would undermine the agricultural base and water supply system. Global or regional climate change. Evidence from paleoclimatology points to several periods of severe and prolonged droughts that occurred in the Eastern Hemisphere around the time when the Harappan civilization declined. Long periods of droughts could make farming difficult, unviable, cause famine and mass migration of the population. Soil salinization, excessive and prolonged irrigation in hot climates, could lead to the accumulation of salts in the upper layers of the soil, making it barren and unsuitable for growing crops, which gradually depleted food resources. Environmental problems. large-scale deforestation for the production of millions of bricks for urban construction and for fuel could lead to changes in the microclimate, soil erosion, changes in precipitation patterns, and ecosystem destabilization, with irreversible consequences for the existence of the population. Internal social and economic tensions. Although the archaeological record shows no clear signs of war, there may have been a gradual increase in internal conflicts, resource struggles, or social unrest that led to decentralization, a weakening of central authority, and the collapse of a complex system of local government. Some suggest that the migration of Indo-Aryan tribes may have played a role, but current archaeological evidence does not provide conclusive evidence of a massive invasion or destruction of cities as a result of their arrival. Rather, it may have been a later wave of migration that came to empty lands. Thus, this makes the Harappan civilization one of the most striking examples of a sudden and inexplicable disappearance in the history of mankind. A challenge for archaeologists and historians who have been trying for decades to understand what exactly broke the thread of its development. The mysteries of her writing and total downfall remain silent witnesses on the banks of the Indus, a reminder of how fragile the greatness of even the most organized and seemingly resilient societies is in the face of changing nature and unsolved inner problems. The Olmecs, the mother culture of Mesoamerica and its mysterious end. Deep in the tropical lowlands of southeastern Mexico, in what is now the states of Veracruz and Tabasco, from about 1500 BC to 400 BC, the Olmec civilization that many scholars call the mother culture of Mesoamerica, Olmeca, was born. Although they may not have created a vast empire in the political sense, their cultural and religious influence spread far beyond their core territory, laying the foundations for all the subsequent great civilizations of the region, such as the Maya, Zapoteci, and Aztecs. Their heritage is evident in monumental art, complex religious systems, and the first signs of the calendar and written traditions that will become the hallmarks of the Mesoamerican world. The heyday of the Olmec civilization is associated with such key centers as San Lorenzo, c. 1200-900 BC, and La Venta, c. 900-400 BC. These cities were not just settlements, but grandiose ceremonial centers that housed huge pyramidal structures, some of which were the first in Mesoamerica, artificial mounds, squares for rituals, and elite dwellings. But the most striking and recognizable symbol of Olmec art is undoubtedly their colossal stone heads. These monolithic sculptures, which reach up to 3 meters in height and weigh up to 40 tons, are carved from basalt boulders delivered many tens of kilometers from quarries, which indicates an incredible organization of work, engineering skills, and centralized power. Each head is unique and depicts, presumably, portraits of rulers or leaders, differing in individual facial features and headdresses. In addition to heads, the Olmecs created exquisite jade products, figurines depicting the Jaguar Man, a key deity in their pantheon, altars and stelae with early forms of hieroglyphic writing, and calendar designations that anticipate the more advanced Mayan systems. The Olmecs were probably the first in Mesoamerica to develop a writing system and a long-count calendar, as well as the concept of zero, which would later be refined by the Maya. Their religious system was complex, with a pantheon including deities associated with nature, jaguar, serpent, eagle, and fertility. They practiced rituals that included sacrifice, and their priests probably played a central role in society. The Olmec economy was based on agriculture, mainly corn cultivation, and a well-developed trade that allowed them to obtain jade and basalt from afar. Their trade networks spanned vast areas of Mesoamerica, spreading their cultural influence. However, by about 400 BC, after centuries of prosperity and dominance, the Olmec civilization experienced a sharp decline. Its major centers, such as La Venta, were abandoned. Monumental art ceased to be created, and the unique Olmec cultural features seemed to dissolve, giving way to new regional cultures. The main mystery lies not in the complete disappearance of the Olmec people. Their descendants probably continued to live in the region, but in the sudden end of their unique cultural and political dominance and the decline of their grandiose ceremonial centers. Among the traditional, rational hypotheses about the fall of the Olmecs, we can distinguish environmental change. The Olmec region was subject to periodic changes in riverbeds and precipitation. It is possible that climate change, such as prolonged droughts or, conversely, excessive flooding, may have led to agricultural degradation, food shortages, and massive population migrations from major centers. Environmental degradation. Intensive farming and possibly deforestation for fuel and construction, especially for firing pottery and making boulders, could have depleted the soil and altered the ecosystem, making it unable to support large settlements. Internal conflicts and social tensions. Although there is no direct evidence of large-scale wars, there may have been internal conflicts between different groups of the elite or revolts of the lower strata of the population, which led to the weakening of the central government and the disintegration of society. Changing trade routes or depletion of resources. If the Olmecs were focused on controlling certain trade routes or rare resources, such as jade, changing these routes or depletion of resources could undermine their economic foundation. However, many scientists are inclined to believe that this was not a single catastrophic factor, but a complex interaction of several causes. Perhaps the central settlements, such as San Lorenzo and La Venta, were simply gradually abandoned as their inhabitants moved to new areas, developing new land and adapting to changing conditions. After the decline of the major Olmec centers, their cultural heritage was taken over and transformed by subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations. The Mayans, Zapotecs, and others adopted elements of Olmec art, religious practices, writing systems, and calendar concepts to unprecedented heights. Thus, the Olmecs did not disappear in the full sense of the word, but their cultural influence became a kind of seed for other great civilizations of the region. The mystery of their end lies in why their unique, monumental form of culture ceased to exist, giving way to new models of development. This is a reminder of how even the most influential, motherly cultures can be assimilated and transformed in the course of history, leaving behind only mysterious stone heads, mute witnesses of a lost world and silent transformations. Minoan civilization, the Labyrinth Palace and its sudden disappearance. On the sun-drenched islands of the Aegean Sea, especially on the largest of them, Crete, from about 2700 to 1450 BC, one of the brightest, most peaceful, and mysterious civilizations of the ancient world flourished, the Minoan civilization. Named after the legendary King Minos, this culture was unique for its time, radically different from the warlike states of mainland Greece and the Middle East. The Minoans seem to have been a nation of navigators and merchants, whose wealth and influence were based not on conquest or military might, but on masterly control of the sea routes and active exchange of exotic goods throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Their sudden disappearance, seemingly almost instantaneous against the backdrop of millennia of stability, is shrouded in a veil of catastrophe and speculation, making them one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of antiquity, the evidence of which still silently preserves the stones of their abandoned palaces. The true heyday of Minoan civilization, or the New Palace period, which spans approximately from 1700 to 1450 BC, was marked by the construction of grandiose, multi-story palace complexes that were not just the residences of rulers, but also the central hubs of all Minoan life administrative, economic, and religious centers. The most famous and best studied of these is the Palace of Knossos, whose complex layout of hundreds of rooms, intricate corridors, vast storerooms, specialized workshops, and elegant living spaces gave rise to the legend of the labyrinth and the dreaded Minotaur in ancient Greek mythology. The walls of these palaces were brightly painted with frescoes depicting lively scenes from everyday life. Amazing marine fauna, frolicking dolphins, graceful octopuses, solemn religious ceremonies, and exciting acrobatic games with bulls, which indicates a cheerful, aesthetically developed culture deeply connected with the sea, nature, and probably some form of religious worship animals. Unlike the defenses of other great civilizations of the time, Minoan palaces do not appear to have had strong defensive walls, indicating the relatively peaceful nature of their existence and perhaps their undisputed maritime dominance, which provided them with sufficient security from external threats. The Minoans used two writing systems that are still an unsolved mystery to scholars: the earlier Cretan hieroglyphic system and a later Linear A. Both systems remain unencrypted, which makes it impossible for us to directly understand their language, read their historical chronicles, get into their daily lives, and deeply comprehend their beliefs. This lack of clarity is one of the main reasons why the Minoan civilization remains so mysterious and elusive to our full understanding. Despite this, numerous archaeological finds, such as exquisite ceramics decorated with marine motifs, magnificent products made of gold and precious stones, show an extremely high level of craft skill and artistic taste. The Minoans were outstanding navigators. Their fast ships plied the expanses of the Aegean and Mediterranean seas, delivering Cretan goods and advanced technology to the Middle East, Egypt, and mainland Greece, spreading their cultural influence. Their religion seems to have focused on the cult of the Great Mother Goddess, symbolizing fertility and vitality, rather than on warlike male deities, which also sets them apart from many of their contemporaries and highlights their unique, peace-loving nature. However, by about 1450 BC, after several centuries of unprecedented prosperity and dominance, the Minoan civilization experienced a dramatic and seemingly sudden collapse. All the major palace complexes in Crete, with the exception of Knossos, were destroyed and burned to the ground, and then Knossos itself fell into final decline around 1370 BC, losing its former power and influence. Minoan culture, its unique art, distinctive writing systems, and complex social structure disappeared, giving way to a new, more militant, mainland Greek Mycenaean civilization, which then established its dominance in Crete, adopting some Minoan features, but bringing its own rougher aesthetics. The main mystery lies precisely in the reason for this rapid and almost total disappearance, which so abruptly, as if at the blow of an invisible hammer, cut off the prosperity of such a developed, peaceful, and seemingly stable culture. Among the traditional, rational hypotheses about the fall of the Minoan civilization, several interrelated factors are the most popular and actively discussed. One of the central versions is the eruption of Santorini, Thera. Around 1600 BC, new radiocarbon dating shows that it could have been even earlier, around 1620 BC. One of the largest volcanic eruptions in the history of mankind occurred on the island of Thera, modern Santorini, located about 110 kilometers north of Crete. This colossal eruption most likely caused a giant tsunami that hit the northern coast of Crete, sweeping away coastal cities, settlements, ports, and, critically for a maritime power, destroying a significant part of the Minoan merchant and military fleet. In addition, the eruption was accompanied by a powerful cloud of ash and pumice that could cover Crete, damaging crops, poisoning drinking water, and disrupting the entire ecosystem of the island. However, a significant time gap, about 150 years between the eruption itself and the final collapse of the Minoan civilization, leads many historians to doubt that this was the sole and direct cause of death. Rather, the event may have been a powerful but not fatal blow that weakened the Minoans and left them vulnerable. Another very strong hypothesis is the Mycenaean invasion. After the Minoan debilitation, either due to the effects of the Thera eruption or internal factors, the warlike Mycenaeans from mainland Greece may have taken advantage of this vulnerability. Archaeological evidence suggests massive destruction in Crete, followed by the appearance of Mycenaean pottery, as well as the adaptation of Minoan Linear A to a new writing system, Linear B, which turned out to be an early form of Greek and was used for the administrative needs of Mycenaean rulers. This indicates their dominance, and perhaps that they took over the Palace of Knossos, used it as their base, and then fell into disrepair themselves, which led to the final decline of Minoan culture. Strong earthquakes. Crete is located in a seismically active zone, and powerful earthquakes were common. A series of strong seismic shocks could destroy palaces and cities, undermining the economy and social structure, making Minoans more vulnerable to external silt threats and internal problems. Finally, internal conflicts or social unrest cannot be ruled out. Perhaps there was a gradual buildup of tension between the various palace centers or between the elite and the lower strata of the population, which led to internal conflicts that weakened society from within before an external blow occurred. Probably the final collapse of the Minoan civilization was the result of a complex interaction of several factors that accumulated and eventually led to a system failure. The eruption of Thera, though not an immediate cause of collapse, could have dealt a serious and long-term blow to the Minoan economy. The destruction of the fleet, disruption of trade routes, damage to agriculture farms. This prolonged economic crisis and weakening made them easy prey for the Mycenaeans, who may have dealt the final blow by destroying the palaces and establishing their authority over the island. The Minoans, lacking a strong professional army and focused on maritime trade and peaceful prosperity, were ill-prepared to repel a large-scale land invasion. Thus, it was a kind of perfect storm when a natural cataclysm, eruption, its ecological consequences, tsunami, ash, perhaps subsequent economic problems, and finally a military invasion, all together led to the disappearance of one of the most unique and fascinating cultures of antiquity. The Minoan civilization, unlike many others, did not completely disappear without a trace. Its legacy continues to live on in the ancient Greek myths about the Minotaur and the labyrinth, and its art and architecture still amaze the imagination with its beauty and elegance. But its political independence and unique cultural identity were erased like a giant wave that swept over its flourishing islands, leaving behind only quiet evidence of its former greatness and the eternal unsolved mystery of its sudden and dramatic departure. Maya, a calendar of stars shrouded in jungle. Deep in the heart of Central America, among the impenetrable evergreen jungles that now cover southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, from 2000 BC until the tragic arrival of the European invaders in the 16th century, one of the brightest, most intellectually advanced, and at the same time most mysterious, flourished New World civilizations, the Mayan civilization. Unlike centralized empires such as the Aztecs or Incas, the Maya were a complex, dynamic network of independent city-states that, despite frequent political intrigues, rivalries for resources, and bloody conflicts among themselves, shared a common culture, a common language, or group of closely related languages, similar religious beliefs, and, most importantly, shared a common culture. Especially surprising is the general and strikingly accurate scientific and astronomical knowledge. Their legacy is not only the monumental pyramids that reach up into the sky, but also the deepest understanding of time, the most complex mathematics, a unique cosmology, and the most important mystery, their sudden, almost silent departure from their majestic cities once filled with life. The Maya truly flourished during the period known as the Classical period, which spans approximately 250 to 900 AD. During this time, such majestic and impressive cities were built as the legendary Tikal, with its giant pyramid temples soaring above the treetops like stone lighthouses among the greenery. The exquisite Palenque, known for its sophisticated architecture, harmoniously blended into the landscape, and the mysterious tomb of the great ruler Pakal. The Copan Cultural Center, famous for its unique architecture. Detailed stelae and altars depicting dynasties and rituals, and the later but equally significant Chichen Itza, which displayed unique elements of mixed cultures and styles. These cities were more than just settlements. They were grandiose ceremonial, political, and commercial centers with towering temple pyramids, elaborate palace complexes, precisely oriented observatories that tracked the movements of celestial bodies with incredible accuracy, and vast playgrounds for sacred ball games that had deep religious and mythological significance, often ending in a series of large-scale events. Human sacrifices. The Maya were consummate masters of architecture and sculpture, creating incredible limestone structures decorated with thousands of intricate reliefs depicting scenes from their mythology, heroic battles, elaborate rituals, and everyday life. They have developed a unique and extremely complex writing system, hieroglyphic, which still causes admiration for its beauty, depth, and linguistic richness, allowing us to gradually, as we decipher, learn about their past. Uncarved stelae, elaborate altars, funerary chambers of rulers, and the few surviving codices, they carefully recorded their history, the creation myths of the world and man, the complex genealogies of rulers, their victories and defeats, and, of course, their astounding astronomical observations and calendar calculations that amaze modern man. However, their greatest achievement was undoubtedly the development of an extremely complex and stunningly accurate calendar system. The Mayans used not one, but several interconnected calendars, including the sacred Solcan, 260 days used for rituals and divination, the civil Hab, 365 days, close to the solar year, and the long count, which allowed them to track huge periods of time, measuring cycles dating back millions of years and predicting cosmic events. Their calendar calculations were so precise that they were able to predict solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable punctuality, and their mathematical system, unique for its time, used the concept of zero, represented by the shell symbol, long before it appeared in Europe, which allowed them to perform complex astronomical calculations and predict the cycles of the planets with great accuracy. Incredible accuracy. The Maya culture was deeply religious, and their vast pantheon included many gods associated with nature: the sun, Kinich Ahau, rain, Chak, fertility, and death. Religious rituals, often involving human sacrifice and bloodletting, played a central role in their daily and political lives, providing a link to the divine world and legitimizing the power of rulers who were often priests. But around 900 AD, during a period known as the collapse of the classical Maya, something dramatic, widespread, and still scientifically inexplicable happened. Most of the majestic cities of the southern lowlands were suddenly abandoned, their inhabitants abandoning their homes and temples. The grand ceremonial centers that had flourished for centuries, filled with life, commerce, and ritual, fell into a deep silence, slowly but inexorably swallowed up by the advancing jungles that were once again taking over. Large-scale construction of monumental structures suddenly stopped. Stelae with records of rulers were no longer erected. The population of these cities sharply decreased or completely dispersed, and the complex political structure based on local rulers' kings collapsed. The main mystery lies precisely in the complex causes of this dramatic, synchronous, and large-scale decline, which affected almost the entire region of the classical Maya, and not in a single local event. Why did a civilization that had reached such heights in astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and the arts suddenly collapse and its population abandon its majestic urban centers? So far, there is no single, universal, or universally accepted explanation that fully satisfies all researchers, making this collapse one of the most intriguing mysteries in history. Among the leading hypotheses, there are several main factors that are most often considered together to explain this complex phenomenon. First, there was excessive population growth and the subsequent depletion of resources. A huge population, living both in cities and in their surroundings, required enormous resources for their food and life support. Constant, uncontrolled population growth in city-states could lead to excessive environmental exploitation. Intensive farming, especially the widespread method of slash and burn farming, when areas of forest were cut down and burned to fertilize the soil, in tropical forests, has led to irreversible soil degradation, depletion, and erosion. Large-scale deforestation for timber production, necessary for building cities, producing lime for plastering huge buildings, and as fuel, has also led to changes in the microclimate, reduced precipitation, and a shortage of fertile land, which has created a large-scale environmental crisis. Second, prolonged droughts. Paleoclimatology data obtained from the study of lake sediments, for example in Lake Chichancanab, and speleothemes, stalactites and stalagmites from caves, indicate several periods of severe and prolonged droughts that occurred during the classic Maya Colossus, especially in the 9th century. A lack of rain could undermine the agricultural base, causing widespread famine, lack of drinking water, and, as a result, lead to mass migrations and deep social upheavals that would weaken central power. Third, the increase in internecine wars. Epigraphic data deciphered on stelae and bas-reliefs show that in the late classical period, there was a significant increase in the number and intensity of military conflicts between the Mayan city-states. These constant, bloody wars for resources, territories, control of trade routes, and importantly, prisoners for ritual sacrifice could drain their strength, resources, and social stability, destroying infrastructure and leading to depopulation. Fourth, Social unrest or uprisings. Perhaps the oppression of the lower strata of the population, the increase in taxes and excessive labor duties necessary to maintain the elite and build monumental structures, led to internal conflicts, uprisings, and the weakening of the central government. The people may simply refuse to support their rulers, depriving them of legitimacy and manpower. Fifth, diseases and epidemics. An increase in urban population density combined with a deterioration in sanitation could contribute to the spread of new or more virulent diseases, leading to epidemics and mass deaths, contributing to decline. Finally, disruption of trade networks. Shifting trade routes or weakening regional trade links could undermine the economies of cities that depended on the import of certain goods, leading to a crisis. However, none of these theories alone can fully explain the extent of the collapse, which affected almost the entire region of the southern Maya lowlands. Most modern researchers are inclined to the idea of a combination of factors which created a perfect storm that undermined the resilience of Mayan society. For example, prolonged droughts could exacerbate the effects of overpopulation and soil degradation, leading to violent conflicts over remaining resources, followed by social unrest and the complete collapse of political structures. The dramatic demographic decline could have been caused by a combination of famine, disease, and war. Thus, it was not a single blow, but a series of interrelated shocks that overlapped, pushing the Maya to the edge of the abyss. On the other hand, there are more speculative, almost mystical versions or traditions that try to explain such a mysterious disappearance. Some Native American traditions speak of curses that befell the Maya for breaking the balance with nature, or for excessive pride of rulers who lost touch with the divine and lost the mandate of heaven. Is it possible that their deep knowledge of the cycles of time, encoded in their astoundingly accurate calendars, anticipated the inevitable end of one of the great cycles that they were unable to prevent by succumbing to fatalism? Were these really divine signs? Or was it just a deep-rooted fatalism inherent in their worldview that paralyzed the will to persist? The Maya as a people did not completely disappear. Their descendants still live today, preserving many elements of their culture, languages, and traditions, especially in the northern Yucatan and in the highlands of Guatemala. But their golden age, their grand stone cities, and their cosmic ambitions were swallowed up in the jungle and forgotten for centuries until archaeologists rediscovered them for the world. The secrets of the disappearance of the classic Maya still whisper on the winds among the overgrown ruins of their abandoned cities, reminding us of the fragility of even the greatest achievements of humanity in the face of a changing climate, internal conflicts in their own nature. Their legacy, though shrouded in mystery, continues to amaze and inspire us, forcing us to think about the limits of human power and the mysteries of time, which they measured so skillfully. Ancient Elam, the lost kingdom of Mesopotamia. In the southwest of modern Iran, in the fertile valleys bordering Mesopotamia, from the IV millennium BC to the middle of the 6th century BC, there was an ancient and powerful civilization, Elam. Its history was closely intertwined with the fate of its great neighbors, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Elam was not a single, monolithic empire throughout its entire existence. Rather, it was a conglomerate of kingdoms and city-states united by a common culture and language. While his neighbors shown in the chronicles, Elam often remained in their shadow, and his disappearance was a slow, centuries-old process that left only fragments still shrouded in mystery. The heyday of Elam, especially during the Middle Elam period, c. 1500 and 1100 BC, and the New Elam period, c. 1100-539 BC, was marked by significant achievements in architecture, art, and politics. The capital of Elam was the city of Susa, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, which later became one of the capitals of the Persian Empire. Magnificent temples and palaces were built in Susa, and their art, especially bronze and terracotta products, was distinguished by a unique style combining Mesopotamian and original Elamite features. Among the most impressive monuments of Elam is the Choga Zanbil Ziggurat, built around 1250 BC, which is one of the few remaining ones outside of Mesopotamia and demonstrates a high level of engineering and architectural skill. Elamite culture was deeply religious. Their pantheon included many deities, and rituals played an important role in everyday life. The Elamites developed their own writing system, first Proto-Elamite, unencrypted, then Linear Elamite, partially deciphered, and finally Elamite cuneiform, adapted from Mesopotamian systems. On these inscriptions, we find references to kings, their victories, and religious initiations, which provide valuable, if fragmentary, information about their history. The Elamite economy was based on agriculture, mainly on grain cultivation and cattle breeding, as well as developed trade, due to its strategic position on the Taurus routes between Mesopotamia, the Iranian highlands, and Central Asia. They were known for their military campaigns against the Mesopotamian kingdoms, winning both victories, such as the sack of Babylon and the removal of the Codex Hammurabi Stele in the 12th century BC, and defeats. Their political structure often fluctuated between a centralized empire and a confederation of city-states, reflecting the dynamic nature of their history. However, despite its long existence and significant influence, ancient Elam as an independent civilization gradually left the historical arena and finally disappeared by the middle of the 6th century BC. Its decadence was stretched out in time, like the slow extinction of an ancient flame, rather than a sudden destruction. The main mystery is why this civilization, which managed to survive for so long and so skillfully adapt to the constantly changing political map of the region, eventually dissolved, leaving behind only archaeological finds and little-known texts. Traditional rational hypotheses. The fall of Elam focuses on a number of interrelated factors. One of the key ones was the constant wars with the Mesopotamian powers, especially with Assyria. In the 7th century BC, the Assyrian Empire, at its peak, launched a series of devastating campaigns against Elam. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, in 646 BC, almost completely destroyed Susa, the capital of Elamite, and many other cities, taking away treasures and destroying shrines. It was an incredibly brutal and destructive invasion that caused Elam irreparable damage. In addition to external enemies, Elam suffered from internal conflicts and dynastic strife. The fragmentation of the Elamite kingdoms and the lack of a unified, strong, centralized government often led to internecine wars, which weakened them in the face of external threats. Some historians also suggest environmental problems, such as climate change, reduced rainfall, or soil salinization due to excessive irrigation, which could lead to crop failures and economic crises, contributing to population decline and migration. However, there are also deeper, almost symbolic aspects to his disappearance. Elam may have been absorbed into larger and more dominant cultural and political entities. After the devastating Assyrian invasions, the lands of Elam gradually became part of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and then, and more significantly, were completely assimilated into the Achaemenid Persian Empire in the middle of the 6th century BC. The Persians, whose empire also originated on the Iranian plateau, partially adopted the administrative and cultural practices of Elam, and Susa became one of their capitals. Elamite was used in the Persian administration along with Aramaic and Old Persian for several centuries. Thus, Elam did not so much disappear overnight as was absorbed and assimilated a more powerful and younger neighbor, having lost its political independence and unique identity. Its culture, language, and beliefs dissolved into the broader Persian influence, leaving behind only silent evidence in stone and clay. This is a kind of cultural absorption when a civilization leaves not through a catastrophe, but through the gradual erasure of its distinctive features under the pressure of a new, dominant paradigm. In this context, the mystery of its disappearance lies in the inexorable course of history, where even the most ancient and enduring civilizations can be erased by the waves of new empires, leaving only the ghostly whispers of their forgotten gods and kings. The Hittites, Empire of Iron, and the disappearance of the curtain. On the vast and often arid Anatolian plateau in what is now Turkey, one of the greatest but now almost forgotten empires of the ancient East, the Hittite Empire flourished from the 18th to the 12th centuries BC. It was a powerful power that for centuries successfully competed with such giants as ancient Egypt and Babylonia for dominance over the strategically important trade routes and rich resources of the Middle East. Their greatness was based not only on their impressive military might, but also on the unique political and legal systems that set them apart from most of their contemporaries. While other civilizations mainly used bronze, the Hittites were among the first to master and, importantly, systematize iron production and processing, which gave them a significant military advantage and left an imprint on the entire history of the region, beginning the Iron Age. The heyday of the Hittite Empire is associated with cities such as their legendary capital, Hattusa, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and its sacred sanctuary, the Yazilikaya Sanctuary. Hattusa was not just a city, but a real impregnable fortress with massive multi-level walls, reaching in some places 8 meters thick, majestic gates decorated with images of lions and sphinxes, and a complex system of underground tunnels and secret passages designed for unexpected sorties or retreats. The Hittites were known for their military achievements, especially their outstanding use of chariots, which were their main striking force in battle. These chariots were lighter and more maneuverable than the Egyptian ones, and their crew consisted of 3 people, an archer, a shield bearer, and a driver, which gave them tactical superiority. Their power culminated in the famous Battle of Kadesh, c. 1274 BC, against the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II. This battle, considered one of the largest chariot battles in history, culminated in the signing of the first ever written peace treaty, demonstrating not only the military strength, but also the diplomatic sophistication of the Hittites. The Hittites had their own cuneiform script, which was written in Akkadian, the international language of diplomacy at the time, and most notably in their own Indo-European Hittite language, as well as in Luwian and other Anatolian languages. Their royal archives found in Hattus include thousands of clay tablets containing state treaties, detailed historical records, unique legal codes, religious texts, and literary works that provide invaluable insight into their culture, beliefs, and daily life. The Hittite legal code was less severe than the famous Hammurabi Code and emphasized compensation for damages rather than harsh corporal punishment or tit for tat, suggesting a more humane and pragmatic approach to justice. They were skilled artisans, especially in metallurgy, and their achievements in iron processing were truly revolutionary for their time, as they held a monopoly on this technology for a long time. The political structure of the Hittite Empire was also unique. A king. He was not an absolute monarch, and his power was limited to the Council of Nobles, the Penkus, who had the right to confirm the heir and even judge the king, which made their system closer to a kind of constitutional monarchy than to typical Eastern despotisms. However, by about 1180 BC, after several centuries of domination and relative stability, the Hittite Empire suddenly and dramatically collapsed, and its capital Hattusa was destroyed, looted, and completely abandoned, sinking into a 1,000-year sleep beneath layers of earth. Most of its territory was devastated, and the Hittite language and unique Hittite culture disappeared from the historical scene, plunging into complete oblivion for several millennia until they were rediscovered by archaeologists in the 1920th centuries. The main mystery lies in the reason for this rapid and seemingly complete collapse, which led to the disappearance of one of the greatest powers of the Late Bronze Age. This event was part of a broader and larger Bronze Age collapse that affected virtually the entire Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. Traditional, rational hypotheses include the invasion of the peoples of the sea. As in the case of Mycenae and Egypt, these mysterious sea peoples, whose origins are still being debated, may have made devastating raids on the Hittite coast and interior, destroying cities, disrupting trade routes, and disrupting the complex political system. Invasion of the Khazars. These warlike tribes from northeastern Anatolia constantly threatened the northern borders of the Hittite Empire and could strike a decisive blow at the moment of its weakening, taking advantage of internal problems. Internal conflicts and dynastic feuds, prolonged internecine wars, struggles for the throne, and intrigues within the ruling elite could weaken the central government and undermine the unity of the empire from within, making it vulnerable to external threats. Massive droughts and famines. Some studies suggest that the Middle East, including Anatolia, experienced long and severe periods of drought at the end of the Bronze Age. These droughts could lead to massive crop failures, famine, disease, and depopulation, ultimately undermining the empire's ability to sustain itself and resist. However, as in the case of other civilizations, none of these reasons alone can fully explain such a large-scale and synchronous collapse, which led to the collapse of an entire system of interconnected states. Many researchers are inclined to the idea of a systemic collapse of the Bronze Age, when a whole complex of interrelated factors, such as climate change, mass migrations and displacement of peoples, disruption of extensive trade networks, internal socioeconomic tensions, and political conflicts, as well as simultaneous external ones invasions coincided, creating a domino effect that destroyed the entire complex structure of existing civilizations. The Hittites were one of the key players in this complex international system of relations and trade. Their dependence on imports of some key resources, such as copper and tin, may have made them vulnerable to disruption of trade routes, or else their advanced knowledge of iron, which they sought to keep secret, eventually became useless when their enemies also mastered the technology, which negated their military advantage. The Hittite Empire didn't just fall apart. It faded from memory for centuries, as if a curtain had come down to hide its greatness and the secret of its fall, leaving behind only the soft whisper of ancient ruins, waiting for us to finally fully decipher their silent stories and understand what led to the oblivion of this mighty land. Empires of Iron. Swazi Valley, Zimbabwe. The mystery of the Golden City and its decline. In the picturesque and fertile land between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers, in what is now Zimbabwe, one of the most complex and powerful ancient sub-Saharan African civilizations flourished from the 11th to 15th centuries AD, the Kingdom of Greater Zimbabwe. This civilization, whose existence was long disputed by European colonizers who did not want to recognize the achievements of African peoples, left behind striking stone buildings that indicate a high level of engineering, complex social organization, and extensive trade relations. However, like many great powers, it declined and was abandoned, leaving only impressive ruins and many questions about the reasons for its decline. The true heyday of the Kingdom of Greater Zimbabwe occurred between the 12th and 15th centuries, when it became the center of a vast trading empire. The most impressive manifestation of this civilization is its grandiose stone structures, especially in the capital city known as Great Zimbabwe, hence the country's name. This archaeological site includes three main zones: a fence structure, a hill fence, and a valley complex. The most outstanding is the Zagorota Telsko construction, a huge elliptical complex of dry masonry without the use of mortar, with massive walls up to 5 meters thick and 11 meters high, built of granite blocks. Inside is the famous conical tower, the purpose of which is still a matter of debate. Perhaps it served as a grain storage, a ritual symbol of fertility, or an observatory. The hill fence, located on a hill, probably served as a residence of rulers and a religious center. These structures demonstrate the incredible skill of builders who were able to build monumental and aesthetically pleasing structures without the use of bonding solutions, which required a deep knowledge of geology and statics. Great Zimbabwe was also the center of a vast and thriving trade network that spanned thousands of kilometers. Archaeological finds indicate trade with the coast of East Africa, and through it, with Arabia, India, and even China. Chinese porcelain, glass beads from India, gold jewelry, metal ingots, and other exotic goods were found in the ruins. This indicates considerable economic power and control over the routes that brought gold from the surrounding mines to the kingdom. The society was hierarchical, with a centralized ruler who probably controlled trade, production, and religious rituals. Their art was manifested in unique stone sculptures of birds, probably symbolizing divine ancestors or patrons. However, around the middle of the 15th century, after several centuries of prosperity, the Kingdom of Greater Zimbabwe declined and its capital was gradually abandoned. The population migrated and the center of power shifted, giving way to new states such as the Mutapa Kingdom. The main mystery lies in the causes of this decline and subsequent disappearance. Such a powerful and organized state, which left behind no written sources explaining its end. Among the reasons for the decline of the Kingdom of Greater Zimbabwe, several main factors are considered. First, the depletion of natural resources. Population growth and intensive activity around the capital could lead to large-scale deforestation for wood and fuel and depletion of pastures. This, in turn, could cause soil erosion, reduce crop yields, and a shortage of livestock feed, which would undermine the food supply and make life in the central region impossible. Second, climate change. Some studies suggest that droughts may have occurred in the region in the 15th century, which would have exacerbated problems with agriculture and water supply, forcing the population to migrate in search of more fertile land and water. Third, changes in trade routes or depletion of gold deposits. The economic power of Greater Zimbabwe depended heavily on controlling the trade in gold and other valuable commodities. If trade routes changed, or if nearby gold deposits were depleted, this could seriously undermine the economy of the kingdom and its ability to maintain a complex infrastructure. Fourth, internal conflicts or external pressure. Although no archaeological evidence of large-scale conquest has been found, it is possible that internal conflicts between various clans or elites were escalating, or that Greater Zimbabwe faced pressure from new, growing regional powers, leading to decentralization and disintegration. The secession of provinces or the emergence of new, more profitable shopping centers could attract influence and resources. Perhaps it wasn't a disaster, but just a gradual migration. The population moved to new, more fertile and resource-rich areas, where new political centers such as Kami and Mutapa emerged. Thus, the Kingdom of Greater Zimbabwe may not have died out overnight, but transformed and shifted, leaving its majestic ruins as a reminder of its former greatness. It did not disappear without a trace, and its cultural heritage became the foundation for subsequent civilizations of the region. The mystery of its decline remains one of the most intriguing chapters in the history of pre-colonial Africa, a reminder of how fragile the balance between man and nature is, and how quickly greatness can be lost if not adapted to changing conditions. The Clovis culture, the first Americans, and the mystery of their rapid disappearance. In the vast expanses of North America, approximately 12,700 years ago, after the end of the last ice age, one of the oldest and most mysterious cultures of the New World, the Clovis culture, emerged and flourished. This Paleo-Indian culture is named after an archaeological site near Clovis, New Mexico, where unique spearheads characteristic of this population were discovered in the 1930s. The Clovis culture is the first recognized and widespread archaeological site in North America, and its sudden disappearance or transformation after a relatively short period of prosperity is still one of the greatest mysteries of American archaeology. The true heyday of the Clovis culture is characterized primarily by its distinctive spearheads, known as Clovis spearheads. These stone tools made of flint or obsidian were beautifully crafted, had a characteristic grooved shape at the base for attachment to the shaft, and were used to hunt large Ice Age megafauna such as mammoths, mastodons, giant bison, and other now extinct animals. Clovis arrowheads have been found over a wide area, from Canada to Venezuela, which indicates a wide distribution of this culture and possibly its mobility or extensive trade networks. The Clovis people were highly efficient hunter-gatherers, able to adapt to a variety of environmental conditions. It is believed that they may have been among the first people to settle the Americas, crossing the Bering Isthmus, or Beringia, from Asia. Their technological prowess and ability to organize big game hunts allowed them to thrive in the post-Ice Age, when the continent was home to many giant animals. They lived in small, mobile groups, constantly moving in the wake of migrating herds of animals. However, about 12,700 years ago, after a relatively short period of dominance, only about 300 years, the Clovis culture suddenly disappears from the archaeological record. Clovis arrowheads are no longer being made, and other regional cultures with different technologies for making tools are taking their place. The main mystery lies precisely in the speed and scale of this disappearance or transformation. What could have caused such an abrupt end to such a successful and widespread culture? Among the leading hypotheses explaining the disappearance of the Clovis culture, the most discussed are the following. One of the central theories is the extinction of the megafauna that formed the basis of the Clovis people's diet. At the end of the Pleistocene, there was a mass extinction of large animals such as mammoths and mastodons. This could have been caused by several factors. Climate change, when rapid warming and melting of glaciers led to the disappearance of their natural habitats and food sources. Another hypothesis is the superpredation hypothesis, or Pleistocene blitzkrieg, according to the theory that the Clovis people, being highly efficient hunters, could have caused the megafauna to disappear themselves, destroying it too quickly, which in turn deprived them of their main source of food and led to their own decline or the need to dramatically change their way of life. The second significant hypothesis relates to a dramatic climate change known as the Late Dryas or Younger Dryas. It was a period of sudden and significant cooling that occurred around 11700 years ago, after a period of relative warming. This cooling could have been caused, for example, by the melting of glaciers and the influx of fresh water into the Atlantic Ocean, which disrupted ocean currents. A cold snap and changing ecosystems could have made big game hunting impossible and forced the Clovis people to either adapt to the new conditions, switching to smaller game and gathering, or disappear. Finally, there is the comet hypothesis or impact hypothesis. According to this controversial but intriguing theory, about 12,900 years ago, the impact of fragments of a comet or asteroid on Earth could have caused catastrophic consequences: fires, climate change, the death of plants and animals, which would have led to the extinction of megafauna and, accordingly, to the extinction of the Clovis culture. Although direct evidence for the collision is still controversial, this theory continues to provoke debate. Probably the disappearance of the Clovis culture was the result of a complex interaction of several factors, and not a single event. Climate change, the disappearance of megafauna, and possibly internal changes in Clovis society or competition with other groups of people. The hypothesis of pre-Clovis settlements that existed before Clovis may have led to their transformation. The Clovis culture may not have disappeared completely, but simply evolved or adapted. The new environment has given rise to many regional Paleo-Indian cultures that have become more diverse in their hunting strategies and technologies. The mystery of their rapid departure remains one of the most fascinating pages in the history of American settlement, recalling the fragility of early human societies in the face of tremendous natural and environmental changes. Their legacy lives on in stone arrowheads found all over the continent, attesting to the skill and adaptability of the first inhabitants of the New World. Aksumite Kingdom, the Lords of the Red Sea, and their unexpected sunset. In the arid but strategically important highlands of present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, a powerful Aksumite kingdom flourished from about the 1st to the 7th century. It was one of the greatest trading powers of its time, playing a key role at the crossroads of the sea and land routes, linking the Roman Empire in the Mediterranean with India, Southeast Asia, and the interior of Africa. Aksum was not just a backwater, it was a full-fledged empire, known for its monumental obelisks, unique writing, and for being one of the first states in the world to adopt Christianity as a state religion. Its sudden disappearance, or rather its displacement and subsequent oblivion, leaves many questions about the reasons for such a dramatic turn in the fortunes of the once prosperous kingdom. The true heyday of the Aksumite kingdom occurred in the period from the 3rd to the 6th century AD, when it reached the peak of its power and influence. Aksum controlled key ports on the Red Sea, such as Adulis, which gave it unprecedented control over maritime trade between the West and the East. Aksumite merchants traded in gold, ivory, incense, spices, pearls, and slaves, bringing wealth from all over the known world to their capital. The monumental stelae of Aksum, carved from solid granite blocks, some of which reached more than 30 meters in height and weighed hundreds of tons, are a striking testimony to the engineering skill and wealth of the kingdom. These stelae, often decorated with images of windows and doors, probably symbolized multi-story buildings and served as memorials or markers of the tombs of Aksumite kings, similar to ancient Egyptian obelisks. Aksum also developed its own writing system, Ge'ez, which became the basis for the modern Ethiopian Amharic language. It was a complex alphabetic system that allowed for the creation of a rich literature, including religious texts and historical chronicles. One of the most significant events in the history of Aksum was the adoption of Christianity in the V century under King Azan, which made it one of the first Christian states in the world. This strengthened ties with the Byzantine Empire, but also led to conflicts with neighboring, non-Christian peoples. Aksumite architecture, especially its palaces and churches, displayed a unique style that combined local traditions with influences from Roman and Byzantine aesthetics. The kingdom had its own coinage, which depicted kings and religious symbols, which also emphasized its economic power and independence. However, around the 7th century AD, after several centuries of domination, the Aksumite kingdom began to decline, and by the 10th century, its power was almost gone. The capital was abandoned, trade routes fell into disrepair, and the great kingdom that once dominated the Red Sea lost its importance. The main mystery lies in the complex causes of this decline and the transformation that led to the fact that the Aksumite civilization, although preserved in the cultural sense in the form of an Ethiopian church and tradition, ceased to be a powerful trading empire. Among the reasons for the decline of the Aksumite kingdom are several interrelated factors. One of the most significant is the spread of Islam and changing trade routes. The rise of Islamic caliphates in the 7th century and their control of the Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, and the Red Sea coast seriously undermined Aksumite control of international trade. Muslim merchants created new trade routes bypassing Aksum, which led to a sharp decline in revenue from trade, which was the basis of the kingdom's wealth. This forced Aksum to seek new trade routes into the interior of Africa, but it could not compensate for the loss of sea trade. The second important factor was the depletion of natural resources and environmental problems. Intensive agriculture in the highlands, as well as deforestation for construction and fuel, may have led to soil erosion and degradation of agricultural land, causing food shortages and famine. Growing drought, the situation in the region, could also exacerbate these problems, making agriculture less productive. The third factor is related to internal conflicts and external pressure. Aksum constantly faced pressure from neighboring tribes and states, especially from nomadic peoples from the north and south. Perhaps internal divisions, power struggles, or rebellions also weakened the central government. Finally, there is a hypothesis about the movement of the center of power and the population to the interior of the country. In response to the threat from Muslim states and changing trade routes, the Aksumite rulers may have decided to move the capital and major settlements from the coastal areas and highlands to the more protected and fertile hinterland of Ethiopia, away from Muslim influence. This led to the gradual decline of the old centers, such as Aksum itself and Adulis, and the rise of new kingdoms, such as those of Zagwe and later the Solomonic dynasty, which retained the cultural and religious heritage of Aksum, but in a different geographical and political configuration. Thus, the Aksumite kingdom did not disappear completely, but underwent a profound transformation. Its economic base was eroded, its political center shifted, and it ceased to be a great maritime power, but its cultural, religious, and linguistic heritage was preserved in the form of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Ethiopian statehood, which still exists today. The mystery of its decline lies in how such a powerful empire was forced to redefine its identity and relocate to survive in a changing world, leaving its majestic stele as silent rendezvous points of former dominance at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. We made a fascinating but sometimes melancholy journey through the pages of history, exploring the fate of great civilizations that for one reason or another disappeared or fell into decline, leaving behind only mysterious ruins, unencrypted writings, and a lot of questions. From the silent cities of Harappa in the Indus Valley to the warlike Mycenae and mysterious Olmecs, from the labyrinthine palaces of Minoan Crete to the grandiose Mayan city-states, from the millennial agony of the Western Roman Empire to the mysterious stone structures of Great Zimbabwe and the fading kingdom of Aksum. Each of these stories is unique, but at the same time reflects universal patterns of rise, heyday, and inevitably decline. In trying to unravel the mysteries of these vanished worlds, Historians and archaeologists offer many hypotheses, which, as we have seen, often boil down to a complex interaction of several factors. This is rarely an instantaneous disaster. More often, it is a slow but inexorable superimposition of various crises, like a snowball gathering strength. Among the most common causes of the decline of civilizations, several key interrelated problems can be identified. First, there are environmental disasters and climate change. Prolonged droughts, devastating floods, changes in riverbeds, salinization of soils due to inefficient irrigation, large-scale deforestation, and general environmental degradation have repeatedly condemned agrarian societies to starvation, and mass migration or extinction. The examples of Harappa, Maya, Greater Zimbabwe, and even Nubia clearly demonstrate how fragile the dependence of civilizations on the natural balance is. Second, there are economic crises and resource depletion. Excessive government spending, rampant inflation, disruption of established trade routes, and depletion of deposits of valuable resources, whether gold, copper, or fertile soil, could undermine the economic foundations of the most powerful states, rendering them unable to maintain their complex infrastructure, armies, and bureaucracies, as happened with the Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Axum. Third, there is internal instability and social problems. Constant power struggles between elites, debilitating civil wars, rampant corruption, oppression of the lower strata of the population leading to uprisings, and devastating epidemics and diseases could weaken the state from within, undermining its unity, social contract, and ability to resist external threats. The classical Maya, the Roman Empire, and perhaps even Sumer suffered from these internal ills that left them vulnerable. Finally, there are external intrusions and migrations. The emergence of new, more warlike peoples, their mass migrations or purposeful conquests often put an end to the existence of already weakened civilizations, as happened with the Minoans, Sumerians, and later with the Western Roman Empire. However, it is also worth noting here that successful conquest often occurred only when the civilization was already significantly weakened by its own internal problems, making it easy prey. The deepest mystery is not just why these civilizations have disappeared, but also in what exactly of them is left. In most cases, it was not so much the human population that often survived and adapted that disappeared, but rather their political system, cultural dominance, and unique technological or artistic traits. Their descendants continued to live, adapt to new conditions, and their cultural heritage was often absorbed and transformed into new, emerging civilizations, becoming their foundation. Thus, Sumer became the cultural foundation of Babylon and Assyria. The Minoans had a great influence on the Mycenaeans. The Olmecs laid the foundations for all subsequent Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, and a new Europe emerged from the ruins of the Western Roman Empire. Even cultures that have seemingly disappeared without a trace, like Clovis, have probably simply evolved to adapt to new environmental challenges and change their way of life. These stories serve as powerful reminders of the cyclical nature of history and how fragile the balance between man, society, and nature is. They show that no greatness lasts forever, and that even the most advanced and powerful civilizations can fall if they fail to adapt to changing conditions, overcome internal differences, or face external threats. Exploring these lost worlds is not just an academic interest or a collection of fascinating puzzles. It is an invaluable lesson for modern humanity, forcing us to reflect on the challenges we face today. Whether it is climate change, social instability, or global economic shocks. These ghosts of the past strongly remind us to learn from the mistakes and achievements of those who came before us in order to build a more sustainable and wise future.